Okay, I'd like everybody to return to your seats so we can get started, since we're a little bit behind schedule. Did you? Okay, you're gonna.
And we should make an announcement about that so that people who will be calling in later who are currently watching the webcast will know that we'll do that.
Okay, so I'd like to go ahead and begin the next session. So before we do get started, we will be getting the phone line back up after these next two speakers. So for those of you who are going to be presenting a little bit later, you'll be able to call in shortly, and then I think what we'll do is have the next two speakers, and when we find an opportunity for a break, we'll bring on the speakers who are on the phone at that time. They can continue to participate via webcast. So I'd like to go ahead and just switch over to Chris Shimoda on the perspective. Now this portion of the meeting will be predominantly on perspective of fleet owners and issues that they might present. Chris?
Thing for you, but if it doesn't reach far enough.
Thanks. As Tony said, my name is Chris Shimoda. I'm the Policy Director for the California Trucking Association, and I'd like to thank CARB staff for the invitation to the discussion today. So a little bit about the California Trucking Association for those who may not be familiar with us. The association has been in existence for 82 years now. We are the largest statewide trucking association in the country and part of the American Trucking Association's 50-state federation. We represent a wide range of members, everyone from your largest Fortune 500 transportation service providers all the way down to your small mom and pop type operations, wide variety of vocations, including last mile and local delivery, which is sort of the focus of this effort. And our average member is a family-owned firm with approximately 20 trucks. So just a general overview of the industry, since we're talking to non-truck folks today. The trucking industry is extremely large. In 2015, NPR did a very interesting article that said the truck driver is the most common occupation in 29 states, including California. We got about 500,000 commercial vehicles registered to operate in the state. Another 1.5 million commercial vehicles registered in other states that are authorized to come into California. But even though this is such a large industry, something very important to know about trucking is that it is dominated by small businesses. About 80% of every truck, all the trucks operating on the road today are operated by fleets that own 50 or fewer trucks. So the mega fleets actually control a very small portion of the overall fleet. And roughly half of the trucks on the road today are operated by fleets with 3 or fewer trucks. So your small mom and pop or owner operator type fleet. And so the industry and the vehicles we utilize also have to meet a diverse set of customer needs and demands, from transporting everything from long haul truckloads to heavy specialized operations like that wind turbine piece refrigerated loads, less than truckload consolidations, e-commerce, agricultural harvests, you name it. The trucking industry has to be able to meet those demands. And each of these segments come with a very specific type of duty cycle and expectations about vehicle capabilities, including the range, horsepower, and load capacity necessary to complete the task. And just a rough breakdown of the industry. The effort that we've been discussing with the Air Resources Board is really mostly concentrated in the smaller class 2B through 6 trucks. So this would range everything from like a Sprinter van type class on the low end up to the classic parcel delivery or box type truck on the higher end for class 2B through 6. And to give you sort of a idea of what population services which, smaller vehicles account for about half of the overall population, but only a quarter of the total miles due to their more local short haul type of applications. They also consume less fuel than your class 7 and 8 classic big rig vehicles due to the fact that these are typically more fuel efficient vehicles as well. So your big rig class 7 and 8 vehicles account for about 80% of all the fuel or energy consumed by the sector. And with traditional internal combustion engines, it's about 3 billion gallons of diesel fuel consumed a year in the state. So a few of the policy and regulatory drivers that the industry is tracking. In the last couple of years, we've engaged with the state, including the Air Resources Board, on a number of different planning and regulatory documents, which have set an initial direction for the transition of the freight industry away from the internal combustion engine to electric drive capable equipment and vehicles. And responding to the governor's freight executive order last year, a multi-agency work group released something called the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan earlier this year that set a goal to deploy 100,000 pieces of zero-emission capable freight vehicles and equipment by 2030. And this isn't just solely limited to trucks. There was a wide variety of different freight equipment that was listed there, including cargo handling equipment, forklifts, refrigerated trailers, which we talked about today. And at the same time, sort of a concurrent process, there is the draft 2016 state implementation plan for ozone, which is also being put together. And the draft SIP includes several measures which anticipate the development and deployment of zero-emission technologies, including up to 26,000 of these smaller delivery type vehicles in the last mile delivery space. There is also measures that would impact plug-in refrigerated trailers, calls for 6,000 transit buses, 7,000 forklifts, and so on. And so I borrowed this slide from the Air Resources Board's November 1st workshop for those of you who are not there. So as you can see across various sectors, so everything from buses and trucks are included here, the demonstrations and deployment of these technologies have been limited so far to date. Compared to the numbers I put up on the slide earlier, roughly 1.5 million trucks on the road at any given day in the state of California. You've had less than 1,000 electric drive capable vehicle demonstrations nationwide to date in this last mile delivery space. Our membership have been involved in most of these demonstrations and have reported that despite some promising outcomes from some of these demonstrations, a sustainable model for manufacturing and actual market development around these has yet to occur from the initial demonstrations. Most, if not all, of the companies who built the initial demonstration vehicles are either no longer in the market or are not supporting the vehicle anymore. And so our members do continue to be supportive of these demonstrations and are involved in a multitude of partnerships to advance everything from your straight battery electric vehicle to hydrogen fuel cell range extended hybrids, you name it. So we're continuing to participate in those. And so a little bit about the subject today. So the interface with the utilities to date on these demonstrations, has been somewhat limited, mostly due to the fact that the demonstrations have largely been small scale and typically limited to get into a situation where you have to do a cost prohibitive utility upgrade. We've sort of planned around how not to get into issues where you're going to incur demand charges. And so if we're discussing broader deployment, these discussions are very timely and necessary to have. There's going to have to be a higher level of coordination with the utilities if we are going to move beyond sort of this initial demonstration phase. And that's a very tough slide to read, but this is taken from actually Ryan, who's going to be speaking for in just a moment from CalSTART. CalSTART did a fantastic report on the initial electricity charge demand from some of the pilot and demonstration vehicles, and you can see that there is a pretty wide range of potential electricity demands depending on which charging strategy and technology ends up ultimately winning out. One of the technologies that is not included on this slide is refrigerated trailers, which are expected to require about an 8 kilowatt energy demand. And so as fleets begin assessing how to integrate these technologies into their operations, the impact to the utility ultimately should become a little bit more predictable. But at this time, you can't really say which technology is necessarily going to win out. So whatever that chosen technology ends up being, it's fair to say that the added load from transportation electrification is going to be significant. In 2011, FedEx, as part of the Electrification Coalition, did model the implication of moving to electric vehicles at one of their locations. And what they found was charging just 10 electrified delivery vans, so less than 10% of the total vehicles at this particular warehouse would result in off-peak charging, assuming that they did charge off-peak, that would exceed the current peak energy demands of that facility. And so, under this scenario, you're not necessarily going to have, and this was one of the discussions I think has been put on the table, that apart from light duty, where you have this sort of opportunistic distributed charging, in the commercial space, at least initially, you are going to have more of a depot-oriented charging scenario. And you're going to have pretty much all of the vehicles at a given distribution center charging all at once. And so you are going to get this concentrated load requirement all at any given time. Assuming that peak charge, I saw that chart that said that the peak time of use charges are moving later in the day. You may conceivably be having fleets wanting to plug in their entire fleet in the evening when their vehicles come back to their home base. And so figuring out how that's going to be structured is going to be something that we're going to need to discuss. And so some issues to consider, just some initial takeaways for our utility partners on this space, is that the impacted members that we have in the last mile delivery space have expressed mutual interest with the state to advance the rate of development and viability of electric drive capable commercial vehicles. From the initial discussions, it's clear that there's a lot of work to be done that will require a high level of coordination between a multitude of stakeholders, including fleets, utilities, manufacturers, and the state. And specific to fleets and utilities, we should work together to understand the implications of freight electrification on the existing infrastructure by a variety of charging scenarios which may emerge, and how rate structures could either positively or negatively impact the economics of the end user. And just thank you very much, and we look forward to the discussion moving forward.
Okay, so we can take a few questions, and then we'll have another discussion, another presentation from CalSTART on, again, the questions and issues associated with trucks. I'd like to take maybe a couple now, if there are some, and then we can have a little bit broader discussion after the next one. Okay, we can go ahead and move on because, again, we'll have opportunity to discuss. So are you ready? Okay, so Irby. Yeah, do you have a microphone?
Just one quick comment. I would urge, in addition to thinking about utilities, fuel providers, vehicle technology providers, and end users as active players, to also consider the DMV, because one of the issues we have had with the early stage technologies and getting them put on the road is actually getting the license plate for a newly retrofitted vehicle or for a vehicle type that doesn't have an engine number. That confuses the DMV a lot. And so if you can somehow get the CEC and CARB to work with the DMV to streamline things for these emerging technologies, that would make our customers happy.
Go ready.
Thanks, Tony. As Tony mentioned earlier, medium and heavy-duty electrification is thoroughly dependent on the different agencies in the room here using all of the tools they have and also working closely together. And in that spirit, on behalf of CalSTART, I wanted to share some thoughts on areas where shared attention will be especially important. As many of you know, CalSTART is an industry association advancing clean transportation technologies, and we try to be technology and solutions neutral. And the study that Chris referenced earlier, you can see another reference to it here. Last year we looked at the economics of charging for medium and heavy duty vehicles, and we found in some that it's heavily dependent on utility programs. Sorry you can't see all of the graphics there, but this is posted so you can find it on the web. The main idea in that graphic is that fuel costs for the energy use component of electricity, given some reasonable assumptions, are lower than diesel but higher than CNG in California. However, once you add demand charges, they're significantly higher than both. That's under current programs. So we took that report and then we said, you know, this is a good, this is helpful, but let's get some fleet operators, utilities, and actual providers of the technologies together to talk it through and learn more about what it means and what could be done about it. So with that, about 6 months ago, we developed what we call the Commercial Electric Vehicle Working Group, the CEVWG, to explore three things: demand charges, infrastructure, and storage. In terms of the business case and the current barriers and opportunities. So you could think of this as three-party talks between those three groups, and they represent in much of California. 5 fleet operators, 4 of those are transit, representing both of the big IOU territories, and then you can see the utilities involved there, and we've got, I don't know, half a dozen of these representatives in the room. So we've had discussions pretty much every 2 weeks over the past half a year, essentially with the idea of creating airtime between the different parties. Pretty much everybody there has presented their kind of view of things, and then we've had a number of discussions. We also sent out a survey asking for the fleets in particular, their perspective on the infrastructure and demand charge issues and opportunities. So what I'll just share shortly here is 3 things: some key lessons learned, tentative recommendations, and issues that we think need more attention. And let me also just say this is CalSTART's observation based on these discussions. So you could think of this as kind of a straw man, and it's not an endorsed recommendation by the logos you see here. So firstly, I know this is text dense, but you've got the 3 issues and rows that I talked about, and then in 2 columns, what we've heard, and then the implications. And in summary, on infrastructure, absolutely heard among all the fleets that large power requirements mean that significant new power supply upgrades are needed, and this needs to be rate-based up to the meter. You might recall Jana's slide from PG&E earlier. She showed the power from the transmission grid and then down through the meter into the EVSE. Really the focus with the medium and heavy sector is more towards the power supply. That's where the big expense is, and that's where the help is needed. On demand charges, I would say that the summary feeling from the fleets was that the stick is just too big relative to the carrot. And in order to be cost effective for fleets, for electrification to be cost effective for fleets, demand charges need to give fleets some combination of three things: either a lower ceiling on demand charges, more benefits for smoothing the loads and moving off peak, or turnkey solutions, aka cheap and easy to manage systems for managing demand charges. And then the third theme is commercial storage. This one kind of captures a few ideas, but the three big ones are commercial storage, talking with the fleets and the tech providers. Number one, appears to be promising for peak demand shaving. But number two, we need to think of it as part of a stacked resource, which is relatively expensive compared to other things like active demand management and other things that utilities have good tools for. And then thirdly, more case study data for the transportation use of storage is going to be needed with pilots. Okay, so those are some of the high-level lessons we heard. As far as solutions go, there's a lot here on this chart, but just to orient you, on one side there's ideas for electric utility regulators, such as, in particular, the CPUC. On the other side is for vehicle regulators, such as ARB and CEC, and then a few points down below that are relevant for all. So I won't read through the bullets, but I'll just mention a couple things. Number one, clearly the solutions needed are interagency, and no one agency can carry this all. We need to ensure that this all gets attention and is coordinated. So allowing comprehensive rate basing, or AKA public investment in medium and heavy duty electrification for power upgrades is going to be essential for the electrification goals. Number two, ensuring continued and stable support for incentives like the low carbon fuel standard, which defray operating costs, is something I've heard a lot about in other workshops but haven't heard discussed much today. One point on that we've heard from transit agencies that's quite important is that the capital expense and operating expense are not treated the same with many transit agencies. Help with operating expenses is a lot more important because federal funding has currently provides greater support to capital expenses. So that LCFS is essential. And then in addition to addressing these charging issues, which we're essentially here to talk about today, we need to continue to provide incentives that decrease the first cost of vehicle purchases, and that remains essentially important. So as you pick through these other solutions, just try to keep in mind this is a kind of a attempted line of best fit among a pretty diverse group of buyers, suppliers, and competitors. And then the final thing I'll share with you here is kind of some things that we've noticed that are challenging issues, which will require a strong and constructive discussion between the agencies in order to make sure that all of the market participants here are able to do as much as they can. So the first one, it might sound kind of basic, but is worth, if you haven't thought about it, doing so. Generally speaking, electricity utilities have sought to reduce the use of electricity as a kind of an overall mandate, but we are now in a regime where we need to increase their use of electricity as an alternative to petroleum, and then treat that electricity qualitatively different and meter it and measure it and manage it differently. So that's number one. Number two is that from a lot of the fleet's perspectives, one of the solutions here is quite obvious, which is to just eliminate demand charges. But when we talk to utilities, we understand pretty quickly that they are programmed to not shift costs from one ratepayer to another, and it's in fact one of the core principles that they're guided in their applications to work by. So there's this fundamental tension between reducing demand charges and trading shifting costs to other ratepayers. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that for now. And then the final point that is going to bear some more consideration, I think, among the agencies is that if you look at the kind of goals that SB 350 and now SB 32 call for, I guess if you think to the framers of those pieces of legislation, and you think about the kinds of things the ARB is trying to encourage with its regulations for transit and truck, we need an extremely accelerated pace of deployment of these vehicles. It happens that the pace of CPUC rulemaking takes time. And just to remind you all, the SB 350 legislation was passed in September of 2015. We'll see applications for the first 3 big IOUs in January of 2017. And then, as we heard, maybe sometime by late next year or possibly the early year following, we'll see a ruling on those first runs at the applications. So this does take time, and we understand that that the success of SB 350 and SB 32 will call for a very aggressive, I guess, acceleration, you could say, of the timescale. So that's pretty much it. I would just say, in conclusion, this is meant, again, to be kind of a line of best fit between these parties, these 15 parties we've been talking with over the last 6 months. Not everybody here has been in those conversations, and I'd invite both those who have been in them and not to comment on these, so we can refine them as we need. Thanks.
Okay, so this is a open discussion period, so if you have any questions or comments about the presentation specifically or any issues that might have come to mind, now's an opportune time to discuss some of those. So can you use your microphone, please? No.
Sorry, this is Noel from the CEC. Matt, could you go back to the agency slide? I don't have a question at this point, but wanted to finish reading. Continued, forward, stop, go back. All right.
Well, and while you're looking at that, I'll mention that, as I think Chris pointed out, or Ryan did, I'm not sure. In terms of the part of our effort in looking at strategies for accelerating the market for zero-emission vehicles in the heavy-duty space, one of the things we are specifically looking at is trying to get better data on energy usage for conventional trucks and short-haul type applications or local delivery applications to further expand, I think, either the categories that we have in the LCFS program or to better define them, because right now we have a single truck efficiency number that influences what the number of credits that can be generated. From buses, we have a higher efficiency difference than we have for trucks right now. And so far, the preliminary information we've seen, it appears that the efficiency gains or fuel reductions that we see appear to be more analogous to buses for certain categories. So we want to understand that better, and that would potentially change the number of credits that could be generated and the economics to a degree. So that's one of the areas that we're specifically trying to target, and essentially the process will take about a year, I think, to reflect the changes and to, I think, get enough time to collect what information's out there. So that is one thing that we're doing to continue that particular program and might influence the economics a little bit. Do you remember your comment or do you have a question now? Okay.
I've come up with something now. 2 questions. For the last bullet point on all agencies, Ryan, the public-private green bank for lending infrastructure rebates, or not necessarily just rebates, but one thing that I'm trying to grapple with is the functioning of the state treasurer office's EVSE loan program that apparently isn't getting much traction or use. And one of the theories is that it's competing with grants, and so people are just going to the grants. Is there like a preference for a type of funding or a better way of designing the loan program, given that there isn't an infinite amount of public or ratepayer funds?
I guess I would invite any fleets in the room to maybe take that directly. If there's no hands, I guess I would just offer that it's a good question. The bullet that you see there is related to the bullet above it, which says that essentially what we're dealing with here is a financing issue that may have long-term, it will invest in long-term capital that may have different risk profiles, and that we fundamentally need to support that and think about that as a finance issue. I have a sense that perhaps the loans aren't enough, or the loan terms aren't good enough, or it's just grants are preferred for some of the infrastructure needed. I haven't looked carefully at it, and we haven't talked about it much as a group, frankly, yet, so perhaps we need to.
Well, and just out of curiosity, I'll put you on the spot. Was this specifically looking at the state, in essence, being the backing the lender, if you will, or would it be something that you're envisioning maybe the utilities would somehow take that role of backing the lender, if you will, in certain types of investments, or the utility themselves would be the entity?
It could be either. It's not well articulated. This was an idea that had come up from one of our stakeholders, and now that there are so many questions, I see we need to give it some thought. So I can't give a lot more detail.
It looks like Irvi has an idea.
Okay. So I was in the same working group, and one of the things that we were specifically calling out on the need for green funds for infrastructure was that there's a gap between funds for the charge station and charges that the utilities can put into investment on their side leading up to the meter. But between the meter and the station, there's often thousands of dollars worth of trenching, permitting costs, and all of that. There's no grants that cover that. The incentives for the vehicles don't cover that. The incentives for the charge stations don't cover that. And so depending on where you are, that can add up. So one of our fleets, for example, when we decided to put our first location with Ameripride in Vernon instead of Fresno, in Fresno it would have cost us $300,000 to do all of the trenching necessary to convert a fleet. In Vernon, the way their facility was set up, we only had to pay the charge stations. Now, if we actually care about equity in where the vehicles are placed, we also need to have infrastructure funding for low-income communities to cover that difference between the charge station and the utility.
I think also one of the ideas here is that there's a kind of hierarchy of needs, of funding needs, in that we need the rate basing to work for the power upgrades, getting up to or close to the meter in general, and then there may be additional. I mean, essentially, there's going to be a prioritization that takes place with that, and then with additional EVSE rebates in this first round of applications, there will be additional needs, and so perhaps the Energy Commission and ARB, through some of their funding programs, support that, and then we get to this part where there's, okay, now what, and then there's more of a public loan type support for that. So at the very least, I would think some kind of roadmap of what the state's funding programs look like in that sequence is how we should organize this.
And utilities definitely can. Eric, I believe Edison, has some programs where they will fund stuff all the way up to the charger, or issue rebates for, or even do that on top of issuing rebates for the charger. Is that correct?
Right. So what Matt's referring to is the Charge Ready program for light-duty vehicles, which installs Make Ready. So that's all of the infrastructure up to the stub where the charging station gets plugged in for long dwell locations in light-duty applications. And then we also provide a rebate for the charging station itself. And so I think that there's some overlap here that we'd have to figure out whose role is what, where's the backstop, is it grants, is it CEC, is it the utilities, is it financing? And I think that that's going to be one of the goals of the applications running through the PUC now and then in January.
So Edward, you had a comment?
Yeah, Ed Lovelace from XL Hybrid. So Ryan, just I don't know if the work group is going to take this forward and talk a little bit more about really how big in scope these major new programs you're talking about that need to be done in a timely manner, because I would view that there's a certain critical mass issue here, both critical mass of infrastructure for the fleets as well as critical mass of deployment for the technology providers. So I don't know if as part of the work group's effort, you're going to start to put forward maybe some numbers about, how many units, how many dollars we're talking about of investment.
That's a good point. So the group is somewhat organized around the CPUC process and proceeding and what's happening there. And just as a way of process, it's the IOUs that are developing their applications, and we're trying to provide as much informal discussion to inform those applications in advance, so that they're as smart as possible and have as much win-win-win once they get to that in January 20th, because as these things typically off work, it becomes a little bit formalistic, the public commenting after that. So I guess I would say part of that needs to happen now, I think, with the applications being developed. And then after that, yeah, I think there's probably more work for this group to do as a working group.
So another thing that will have to be explored further is to what extent utilities will need to coordinate with state agencies on what incentive funds, like whether or not it makes sense for both utilities and state agencies to be funding similar programs. If those can exist simultaneously, that whole topic needs to be hashed out at some point.
I think it's a great point, and that, yeah, I think what we need is a map that shows here's the societal investments needed in medium and heavy duty electrification, and here's how the different agencies are supporting those investments.
Okay.
And
So we'll jump over to Chris and then back over here next.
Yeah, just a point about some of the existing programs, like most of your grant programs on the vehicle side, and then on the loan program through Treasury, CalCap, these are typically small business oriented. Mm-hmm. CalCap specifically, I think, has like a $20 million revenue cap. And so the initial early actors in the space are typically not going to be fitting into the CalCap profile, may not actually need the help getting a loan at a preferred rate, but I think it's closer to the issue that was brought up of if it's $300,000 cheaper at one area versus another, most businesses are going to select the one that makes the more financial sense. And so this was also brought up in the context of some of the Moyer discussions that there is a role for public incentives, maybe not necessarily on the loan side, but the grant side has to be oriented toward the people who are actually going to be taking advantage of these extremely early deployments of zero-emission vehicles. And it's not going to be, as much as I would like it to be, it's not going to necessarily be the fleets that are under $20 million in revenue or under 10 trucks total in their fleet.
If you can go to, this is Bill Boyce with Smith, if you could go to Ryan's last chart, there was one statement there that we were seeking to get, I think it's one more other way. There you go. Seek to avoid shifting costs from one customer to another. 99% certain we're actually required by law to make sure that they essentially don't have one customer class basically subsidizing another. So it's not really something we seek, it's something it's required. And we have to go to a lot of effort to make sure that the cost recovery in each class stands on its own. And we don't have much discretion there.
Well, and before you get off that point, I mean, isn't part of that discussion what's included in the scope of that analysis? Because to a degree, there's benefits that aren't necessarily quantified in traditional utility thinking, but when you look at air quality and other benefits that everybody benefits from cleaner air.
Those aren't going to be the types of, I'll just say, the externalities usually are hard to calculate into those with regards to what the value is, but this is, very much when it gets down to, individual rate class, which is one of the ways to explain that is really how do we optimize a certain rate for a certain class of customers to try to get it as very precise as we can to get the lowest cost. And anyway, just, I can tell you we go to a lot of pain and effort to be compliant with that principle.
just really quickly on this, I think this is an opportunity where we rope in the ratepayer advocacy groups to find where the lines are for how much TE programs can be rate-based.
Yeah, I think they have a lot of input on that, and, you know, a lot of the discussion, I think, is whether or not, you know, there truly is benefits across to all ratepayers. I mean, there's a lot of other cost benefits we get into with regards to, does this additional, you know, electricity load help benefit all ratepayers, and therefore it gets spread across but a lot of the current proceedings, there's still a lot of pushback on that, and also a lot of discussion and worry about stranded assets. So there's still a lot of skepticism, I think, in that stakeholder community.
Noel?
Noel Chrysostoma from the CEC. My question was on a different subject, but to Bill's point and wearing my former Public Utilities Commission hat, SB 350 and its definition of TE is more broader in its permissible, like, societal benefits that it includes in a cost-benefit analysis. And I'm not sure if Amy is still online and can provide input on that. She isn't.
We don't, yeah, we'll get the phone line up in a little bit, but she's not online right now. We don't have anybody right at the moment.
Right, and then in terms of more recent law with SB 32 and SB 197, it appears that there might be some additional societal benefit considerations that could be included in at least the CEC's assessment of costs and benefits of programs due to the focus on considering disadvantaged community impacts. That's like a common theme across SB 32 and SB 197, or maybe it was AB 197. But for climate change mitigation efforts, one of the new things was in those two pieces of legislation were the fact that climate impacts on those disadvantaged communities should be included. So it's more expansive.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually this relates to, I think, a point, Ryan, that you had included, and I don't know if you intended it this way, but I think one of the basic discussion points that we've had, it's if you use, usually it comes up in the context of natural gas, but if you use natural gas to produce electricity, you can drive a bus and a truck, frankly, electric truck, a lot further. So you'd actually reduce the total amount of energy you need to provide to do the same amount of work. And there's value in that, and we know that we're going to have to grapple with best use of renewable fuels because there isn't an infinite supply either. And so as we look into the future, I mean, that's going to be a direct cost one way or another to be able to address that, and to the extent that we can have people use the most efficient means of transportation is a way to address that. That's not always considered in the thinking and has to be in time.
You know, let me make one more comment on that last statement, though, but that whole number 2 also tries to get options reducing demand charges. Last time when I presented in April, we're not held to the demand charge as the way to recover that cost. We just have to recover that cost in that rate class, so to speak. And for instance, we developed a rate where we basically, demand charges were more or less created to help customers reduce their energy charge if they had a high utilization rate. And kind of getting back to that, I mean, the problem we have with a lot of these applications is they're very, what we would call spiky in the utility world, where they're very short duration but high energy. There's other ways to get to different rates where those can be, I'll just say, averaged at a different level. And, you know, we're not precluded, like I said, from getting rid of demand charges, but we still have to recover cost in those different applications. So the real requirements to recover the cost, how we do that is, you know, has a lot more freedom. It's just that a lot of customers prefer demand charges when they have like a much more higher utilization rate, very, very steady type loads.
If I could ask a follow-up, Bill, could you say a little more about what is the customer class when you think about Foothill Transit or UPS? I mean, what are the boundaries of this class?
You know, majority of these types of things all fall within what utilities would have as a normal commercial customer class. And so that's used to seeing some sort of business, like I said, where it's got ongoing operations more at a steady state type of load. And these are where, you know, we don't have a lot of experience with these other types of loads and that type of factor. And, you know, what sort of cost arrangements and flexibility we have, that's just where, you know, you've heard me saying other stuff, we just don't have a lot of data to help us understand, you know, what the major cost drivers are. I mean, it kind of, like I said, it kind of goes off of our existing commercial formula, but they're not necessarily aligned with these types of electricity uses.
No. I found this section in Health and Safety Code. So ARB is supposed to consider the social costs, where that includes net agricultural productivity, impacts to public health, adaptation impacts, damages from flood risk, changes in energy system costs, all per metric ton of GHG per year. So it's pretty big, at least from ARB's standpoint. I'm not sure how integrated the PUC's analysis will be, but I remember my other question, Ryan. Matt, could you go back to the same slide? Along the lines of moving quickly and learning and applying those learnings simultaneously for the novel demand management and grid integration pilots, how much additional learning would you say would be important beyond what has been funded through, say, the EPIC program or energy settlement or previous ARFETP funding that's spanning probably dozens of charging pilots thus far?
Again, I invite other tech providers or fleets to weigh in on this. But I guess I would say at a high level, there are demonstrations and pilots for commercial storage, but there's not a lot with transportation, and certainly not a lot with even heavy-duty fleets that have significant numbers of fleets or vehicles. So pilots that support those types of applications, and then use storage and or distributed generation and or other control strategies to show how that can work at high levels in order to get the data that we're hearing we need. I mean, that's the type of funding we need.
So just to press a little bit, would modeling be amenable, or based on like the controls systems that have been developed for light duty segments, would modeling the impact of those control strategies on medium and heavy duty sectors be enough, or would customers want to actually put additional steel in the ground before, say, designing programs that leverage those previous control strategy learnings?
Do we have cyber switching here? Would you like to speak to that?
Oh, we need you to have a microphone. If you want to come to the table, feel free.
Yeah.
I have a spot right here.
Actually, that's perfect, Matt. I was just going to try to ping you so you know I was here. I think I switched the power off, cyber switching. We're an EVSE provider, and what we actually do is a piece of equipment that sits between the panel and the EV charging stations that then can sequence, hey Bill, that then can sequence the charging on a 1-to-4 ratio. So it really does reduce the facility requirement. It also has an impact on the demand charge situation, because instead of having 4 vehicles hitting and needing that peak demand at one time, you have one. And we just rolled out, that's why I'm here today, we announced last week, a high current version of our charging system. So it can work with any type of voltage you have out there. So Matt, thank you for calling me out on this. I was pinging you to say, hey, I'm here, let's talk about this. It's very simple, again, just on a rotational basis, and it reduces the facility need on at least a 4-to-1 basis.
So have you done any, you've worked with some heavy-duty fleets in the Bay Area, correct?
Not yet. We just rolled the product out. So we're actually looking to pilot and looking for partners that are willing to test this with us so they can see the impact. We have the standard level 2 charger product has been out, and we've been using that, but this is the new one for the heavy-duty vehicles.
So perhaps this is an opportunity to actually shed some light on this area.
So first of all, any questions on how that works?
Well, I'd like to actually bring Len into the discussion. I understand that as far as your facility, you do have a charging management strategy and software package. I don't know how they compare to each other, or is it the same?
We're using IO Control's electric load management system, and it does something similar where we can control the buses that are being charged and set it up so that the buses that come in that need the most charge will be charged first on a priority basis, and to level out the need.
And so, Len, in your example, the software actually knows what the need of the fleet is for the next day and prioritizes the charging to manage the demand chargers and the total demand of the property, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So there are some types of software that do manage that, and knowing a transit fleet, I think, has a more, well, I'm not going to say it that way. Transit fleets typically have fairly predictable patterns, and the software sounds like Lin software actually is part of the scheduling software that actually, it's a pretty smart system that actually knows what the need's going to be based on what the transit fleet scheduling is. And so cost can be managed that way. And your strategy
Actually, it's real time.
It's real time.
It's
Okay.
real time. So when the bus hits the yard or the barn, as we often refer to it, it downloads its need to the cloud, and then that controls ELMS as it gets to as it's plugged in.
And there's two basic priorities for that, as I understand it. First, it's you manage the amount of power that you need at the property, which manages the cost of the size of the transformer, plus your electricity rates to the extent you would minimize your demand charges, right?
Yeah, Southern California Edison, it forgets about us, so that's not true. We've got a good relationship with Edison. We'll have four transformers on our site. But yeah, we need to keep that demand below the capacity, the cap, so that we don't have to build a substation.
I think, no, I took your question to be mostly about, is it good enough to just theoretically model the power supply needs and the solutions, or do we actually need to fund demonstration projects? I mean, is that what you're asking?
This is Noel from the CC. Yes, essentially, there's kind of a timeline trade-off between doing a year of pilots and a year of gathering data, writing the report, and then getting that into a PUC proceeding or a CEC PON or an ARB rulemaking. And so given that there are these commercial technologies that have helped Proterra manage their demand charge, NRG set up fast charging stations, et cetera, through a variety of state-funded R&D projects. Is more R&D truly needed? And I'm not trying to squelch innovation or anything, but there is a need to apply learnings and determine if there's anything really novel before having the opportunity cost of deployment, essentially.
It's a shame we don't have more fleets. The fleet group is thinned a little bit, but I think in general I've heard that because this technology is so new, those using the vehicles really want to validate on their own the claims. And I don't want to point anybody out here, but I've certainly been in facilities where they say, look, we don't take anybody's word. We need to do our own testing and research. And I don't know if it's R&D as much as it is, I guess, validation. But again, I'd rather defer to other fleets who are looking at this.
Yeah, this is Lisa from San Diego Airport Parking Company. I have a few comments related to what Noel was saying, and then Bill is related to the IOUs. So let me just kind of start off with this. I mean, we have a huge revenue opportunity associated with what we're doing all day long is, is millions of miles of fuel costs associated with our businesses. And I don't know that all the IOUs see that as a great opportunity. The assets is a cost, but the revenue opportunity is also the business opportunity. And we're doing 1 million trucks and buses, 30,000 miles a year. 30,000 mile a year is going to be 30 billion miles a year. 30 cents, 25 cents, $7.5 billion a year in revenue. I think when we talk about assets, I think that becomes real minimal associated with where we're at today with building an asset. All of us in business understand if we have to buy our trucks, we would only welcome such an opportunity. So, I mean, I think that's one way. We've all had to reinvent ourselves as it relates to this new fuel, the new behavior, the new management, the new range limitations, the new demand cost. There's so many, we're reinventing ourselves completely because of air quality. And I think this is where the IOUs and the regulatory issues associated with it. I am now a party with 15-04012, which is the general rate case proceeding with San Diego. And in that, there was a recent ruling to provide me, I'm the only San Diego commercial fleet operator, with a temporary EV tariff rate to make it a benefit. And why? Because of air quality. And so it is a benefit. It's a benefit associated with, while there is costs associated with how we're going to control the things we need to consider with regulatory issues, I think this is where the education is going to be critical as it relates to what we can do at the CPUC level so that we can make some of these changes happen with the IOUs. The IOUs right now are our deal breaker. We can't run these vehicles unless there's a benefit. We have other choices. And if the air quality standards are going to be revolving around a goal, infrastructure is our deal breaker right now. We can make the technology fast in the vehicles. We can make the technology fast in the EVSEs. But if we can't drive it with a benefit, these $7.5 billion is going to go somewhere. And if it's going to be towards inspiring us with the infrastructure, associated with, how we drive these vehicles, I mean, this is kind of where we're at right now. It's a road that you can't imagine what it's like until you're doing it. And it's hard to do because there's a lot of management. So the duty cycle for the medium duty transits and buses and trucks is beautiful for the space. In diesel, we're doing glow plugs issues, particulate filters, oil changes. I mean, you need to be on the road long and fast and forever to support the use. But when you go to an EV, it loves short duty. We even get a little bit more range. So it's the perfect duty cycle to support EV, especially in communities that have disadvantaged areas and congested roadways already. They're the most polluted. So I just kind of wanted to make sure that we're maybe taking an open perspective as to educating what we can do with the IOUs to support the end users. And the last point that I want to make is that we really need to build the infrastructure, and we need to support the testers, who are the people, the customers. If we don't support the customers in this use to make it a benefit while we're testing the product, I don't know that we're going to get adoption because it's a difficult task to get these small business operators moving this direction when they've got other choices that are not so bad. 23 cents a mile. I'm 12 cents a mile in my Sprinter diesels. So I mean, I think we really have to come down to that. It's cost per mile. We live in these vehicles and they're a huge expense. They're not where we make our money. We make our money, this is just an expense to our line items. And it's the biggest expense besides payroll. Thank you.
Irby?
Also wanted to speak to Noel specifically. Do I think studies are going to be useful or cut it? And the answer is a flat out no. So Motive builds electric powertrains for medium and heavy duty trucks that are in a variety of applications. And even just the way one customer uses a truck with the exact same powertrain compared to another vehicle in the same state but a different utility, Their rate structures are different in terms of what they're hitting. Their use cases are different. The temperature will impact the way they operate, how much charge they're using, the predictability of the model, and their satisfaction with the solution. So what would be acceptable for a transit organization where you've got a large number of vehicles and they're very predictable is not the same as if you're a private business and your revenue generation and time in front of a customer is based upon the quality of your vehicle. It's not the same as a school bus where if you are late, your kids are not getting to class. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that every single one of those is going to at some point integrate with the grid if we meet the state's guidelines. And if we meet the state's guidelines, which is a huge if, then the grid as we have and as we have planned will not be prepared. And so if we aren't generating case studies on the difference between a work truck and a delivery truck and a school bus versus a shuttle bus versus a transit bus that has commuter routes, when all of those vehicles go online, you're going to go, oh shit, the model broke. And it's going to be an entirely predictable problem that will reduce the ability of the utilities to provide service, will make the fleets unhappy with their new technology, and will mean most likely at the end of that vehicle's life, instead of going, should I buy an EV again, everybody remembers the pain points. So unless you do the advanced studies and remove as many of the pain points, do as many iterations to remove bugs, we're on our first generation of software. If you remember the first iPhone, it was nothing compared to the pocket computers we carry around. We need to prepare to have the top of the line solution, because looking at the federal government, we're not going to see their leadership. We need something that is going to be able to meet demand nationwide without incentives. And to get there, we have to have the absolute best product on the market, and that's going to take a lot of work.
I do have one question for Chris. We do know that for some of the trucking applications, they have seasonal fluctuation. Such as parcel delivery trucks. What kind of a special assistance do you see needed for that kind of applications if in the entire transportation electrification?
So I think the high-level answer to that is flexibility in the type of technology that the fleet is running. During peak demand, you're going to have a lot more need to have the ability to run something that maybe you wouldn't necessarily do if you had 20% of your fleet parked. And so one of the issues that we flagged is that the current full battery electric technology on the parcel side only fulfills a certain percentage of the range demands for that business line. The possibility of looking at more of like a range extended hybrid sort of technology has been opened up, and we'd like to explore that more with ARB, because that would eliminate some of the range anxiety of turning over your entire distribution center to something that gets 40 to 60 mile range, and that's it. And then just one observation about I think the statements that were just made. We're really trying to preach the fact that we're in the early stages of these discussions, and the common thread that I'm hearing a lot is the need for a lot of coordination. And one of the things that you're going to find is that each fleet and each facility is going to have a different set of needs, a different business model, a whole unique set of facts when you go into figuring out how to deal with that particular facility. And so, this is really about setting up a process. And I haven't even mentioned the manufacturers, by the way. So, this presupposes that there are going to be products available to purchase as well. And so, one of the things that we've had initial discussions about is if the fleet decides it's going to be this facility, we're ordering the vehicles, we need to talk to the utility, how all that all comes together in a way that makes business sense for that particular fleet is going to be a very difficult process to manage if there's not a high level of coordination going on between the fleet and the utility, the manufacturer and the fleet. You don't want to spend, let's say $1.2 million upgrading a facility, and then the manufacturer decides they're not going to come through with the vehicles or equipment, and then you have a stranded asset for a number of months. And so that would be, I think, to Noel's point about do you need more studies, I think, case studies are good. I don't even necessarily know that we have a clear picture, that we provide a clear picture, utility partners, of what electrifying some of these facilities is actually going to mean from an energy demand standpoint. And so that's, step number one that we need to get taken care of.
So would it be fair to say that it's also very important in the trucking industry, just like the transit industry, that they have to do route simulation and also work with their utility to start with? Don't just go ahead to buy a whole bunch of vehicles that you may not know how to use them. I mean, you know how to drive them, but it's not just about driving them.
I mean, to date, our scenario has been a little bit different because, like I said in the slides, the demonstrations to date have been limited to avoid some of these issues. And so, when we're talking about full deployments, you're going to have to get into talking about a high level of demand management. There's only going to be so many things a trucking fleet can do to manage around some of the time of use charges. A lot of these things are dictated by issues that have nothing to do with the cost of the electricity. And so, once we get into, okay, well, this entire, let's just say we have a specific distribution center that has 100% of their service within the range of the current technology. Once that decision is made, all of these other things start coming into play. For instance, what is the demand charge, if any? How are we going to manage around it? That's sort of where we are in the process.
So I'm going to attempt to tie together a few of these thoughts, which is, one, the logistics of deploying a fleet is complex and really difficult, and there's a lot of players involved. Lisa, managing an electric fleet comes with its own challenges as well. And Ryan, you were talking about how we haven't discussed LCFS yet, and we, at our April 8th meeting, talked about the potential for utilities to actually handle the LCFS credits for an electric fleet because it can be burdensome administratively for a fleet to deal with that. And in that same vein, we've talked with utilities about the potential for utilities to have a outward-facing group whose sole purpose is to work with fleets it's this one. So the potential to work with fleets, to work through all the logistical things, to share their expertise, to kind of hold their hands and provide some advice and work them through the process of transitioning to a different technology. So I think having that component in each utility to be able to walk a fleet through that transition serves to solve a lot of those issues as long as we have the knowledge to back that up.
So, sorry, I know you're tying it up there, but I do have to comment on this one. I think the LCFS is, it's very, well, it's multifaceted. I think it's absolutely important to the fleets who have started to use it and are getting benefit. However, I would think that the first order of business that I've heard is, let's get it stabilized and let's increase the value of it. I mean, let's get the program stabilized. Let's increase the value of it. I think those are the first items I've heard. It being inaccessible or needing some kind of, I guess, facilitation. I think definitely that's worth exploring. But the point here and what is meant to represent the working group is that we need to stabilize and increase the value of the LCFS for fleets.
Well, and I guess in what way do you mean that? Because it is a largely market-based regulation. It really depends on supply, demand, and
again, unfortunately, we've got a very thin group of fleets here now. Okay. But I mean, generally speaking, it's not very bankable, right? Because it's hard to take an LCFS credit and talk to a financier and say, assume that this is going to be our full 100% of our future cash flow, because there's questions about the program, what it's going to be worth.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's uncertainty with ultimately with any issue, as I think everybody knows. But I guess that to I don't know, not really to tie this issue together, but that we have a chicken and egg situation here to a degree, and part of it is. I think that was part of the discussion. A fleet's going to make a decision based on the best information they have. And to a large degree, what the utilities do in terms of infrastructure, whether some of those costs are covered, financed, or addressed in some way, will in fact change what a fleet owner decides is the better business decision. I think that's true for transits as well as other parties. And so I think the discussion kind of revolved around demand charges is when we're looking at different fleets, like, okay, given demand charges and what they are, here's a strategy that makes sense. People who can apply this strategy, their costs will be lower than people who can't. So having predictability is pretty valuable. Is there any, and to a large degree, we want to, I mean, I think everybody's kind of said, look, we want to do either some form of pilots or some type of program to get better information, more experience, that kind of thing. I think everybody largely would support doing that, but not at the expense of just studying, 30 different kinds of fleet operations for the next 5 years before we actually move forward. So how do we, and I'm looking to the fleets and the utilities kind of say, okay, how do we set up the process so that there's some flexibility in terms of what might move forward in terms of what the utilities present that isn't going to be, hey, I'm working with one fleet on this particular approach. Everybody else, just wait and see what happens for another couple of years before you can actually step forward and take your own risk and learn more about what your experience might be with given vehicles or technology or different choices. How do we give the utilities enough information to say, well, if we set up things this way, then multiple people can step forward that are willing to get some better experience rather than effectively narrow it to, yeah, we're moving ahead with one concept, one fleet, and we're not going to move much further than that. I do think a lot of things will be changing.
Well, items 1, 2, and 3 on that first column, those are pretty big recommendations. So allow comprehensive rate basing for essentially all, most if not all, medium and heavy duty electrification, give additional rebates incentives for EVSE behind the meter, and eliminate or minimize demand charges outside of peak hours, or do something with a similar carrot. Those, we're not suggesting that we wait for more studies to do that. Those would be profound, I think.
Chris, do you want to add anything to, you're nodding your head?
No, I mean, I think that there's sort of the CPUC proceeding issues, and then there's the logistical issues of once a fleet actually decides to do this, there's going to need to be, hey, by the way, I'm going to be adding this huge demand onto your grid in a year and a half, and sort of the steps that are going to need to be taken at that point. And so I would separate the two and say, it sounds like some of the big concerns, because we highlighted some of the same stuff as CalSTART, that, essentially the rate structures and the demand charges, everything leading up to the EVSE itself, all of that is going to need to be sort of figured out in a way that does not make switching to an electric vehicle punitive. And also the expectation that private fleets are going to upgrade large portions of infrastructure they don't control and may abandon. So I think they're two separate issues. The coordination aspect is, I think, mutually exclusive from some of what's happening with the PUC right now.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, Bill, to at least the comment that the way I'm interpreting some of the discussion is, first, there's just an upfront capital cost for infrastructure that fleets, again, were stated, aren't prepared for. So if that cost is simply spread out and recovered, the utilities might be in a position to do that, or another entity, bank or something else, so that it wouldn't necessarily be transferred from the customer per se, but it would be distributed, I guess, differently. I don't, is that the variability or the uncertainty of if I do this location, that location, it's a completely different decision. I think having some, I don't know, consistency or risk spread out a different way might be
right.
a
Let me
solution.
just kind of describe a little bit. I know at least in our utilities case, the demand charges are typically a way for us to pay for the replacement cost in the future of all the transformers on up the line. Mm-hmm. And so, when a transformer, reaches its end of life, we don't necessarily come back to the individual customer and say, okay, 2 transformers up the line, we've got to recover costs. So that's what the demand charge does, is it recovers a lot of the costs of the wear and tear on the overall system, one way to look at it. So it's not arbitrary. It goes towards the maintenance of the system. And I kind of point at 4 to 9. A lot of the wear and tear on transformers and stuff are all caused by heat. And it's all caused by our summertime heat. And a lot of times, even by 9 o'clock, they're not cooled off enough. So even adding more load at 9 o'clock that's not a good thing. You're still going to drive a higher replacement cost because we're going to have to change out transformers more frequently. We ran models on the EV-related load impacts at like 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, midnight, and 2 a.m. And things even at 10 o'clock are kind of really almost 90% of what we see at peak anyway. But, kind of getting back to the rate structures, I mean, the last one I kind of showed, we developed the rate where we levelized and we got to a flat electricity load by assuming the demand charge into the energy cost, and it was able to give people a flat fee, so to speak, without the without the demand charge in it. So that shows you some of the ways that we can be creative in addressing the cost. The other thing back on the energy management devices, what I was going to point out, flattening the load and getting the utilization rate up, that really what it does is makes that load look a lot more like our normal commercial load. So it's not that it's new or unique in the shape of it, actually gets it back to where the majority of commercial loads are, where you would have something like 80% of your power going out at kind of a steady demand. And it really makes those very, what I say, peaky loads much more looks closer to our normal commercial load classes, which then you can, get the advantages of that. I mean, that's on the utility side, that's the way we see it. You flatten the load and you build up your utilization rate, you're going to get a better overall cost for your operations.
All right. So now I'd like to, does anybody want to take a break at this moment, and then we can continue the next two sessions, or just go right into the next two? We'll continue, okay. Okay, yeah, we do need to get the people on the phone back online. But can we do the transit one now, Matt? Is there any reason we don't move ahead? Okay, it's Lynn. Okay, yeah, so our next speaker will be calling in, so. Lynn, you want to actually start it? Want to get them online? Or do this just a moment so that we don't have to have the dialing over your voice. Let's see if that slides or not.
Welcome to the conference calling center. Please enter your numeric passcode followed by the pound sign. Your passcode has been confirmed. Please stand by as you are joined to your conference. You are the first caller to this conference. Please wait while others join.
Okay. So while others will be joining now, this next session will be hearing from the transit fleets and some of the infrastructure providers as well. So Lynn, you want to go ahead and, are we? Oh, we're not ready.
Lightning speed of state technology.
Yeah, usually better put them on. I don't know. It's usually safer to put it on the machine anyway in case of a net problem.
I don't know. Too much. Yeah, exactly. Well, first, let me apologize to any of you who have heard this sermon before. we're, as soon as this loads up, if we're talking about infrastructure, we started our infrastructure implementation project about a month and a half ago now. It's moving along quite nicely. It was supposed to complete sometime in February next year. Looks like at this point we'll finish by the end of this year. The contractor has been really moving along really well. We've gotten great support from Southern California Edison, who will be delivering our power to us. We're actually buying from Lancaster Choice Energy, which means the city of Lancaster, one of our partners in our joint powers agency. So they're promising some pretty fantastic rates. We're currently paying about 13 cents per kilowatt hour. In February this year, our board approved a contract with BYD to supply 85 buses. So the first phase of our infrastructure, our depot charging project, is for 50 buses at just over $3.9 million. We're bringing power about 770 feet from the closest main line of Southern California Edison. Will be underground to where we get to our facility. At that point, the conduit will be open trench. A little bit ago, somebody said something about heat. As we were designing our project, when it would become fully implemented, we were going to lose too much energy in terms, once it was on our site, in terms of heat. So heat dissipation is really important. Some of the things we've learned, okay, there we go. Currently, we have 2 BYD wave-ready buses. We're looking at average range of about 180 miles, depending on which connector we're using in terms of the operation. We refer to the connectors being that thing between the steering wheel and the seat. Some of them have a very heavy foot and also a very heavy brake pedal, so we're not getting nearly the range on some of our buses that we are on others. Ranges from 120 miles to 100 to 220. Again, depending on the operator. BYD advertises a range of 155 miles. We're looking at a really good uptime for our vehicles, about 15,000 miles between service interruptions. Average cost for preventive maintenance and energy at this point is about 38 cents a mile. We have been fortunate to get 2 grants from Caltrans through the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. One last year for $24 million, one this year for a little over $8 million. We have on order at this point 39 buses. 13 of those are 60-foot articulated buses, 16 45-foot commuter coaches. We have buses running down into the LA basin, and we have 10 battery electric 40-foot transit buses that we were good enough to get on this last TIRCP grant. We're going to be we'll be operational this month with 2 50 kilowatt inductive chargers from Wave, company out of Salt Lake. We have on order with them now 11. We should see the first prototype of the 250 kilowatt charger by the end of the year. That'll be a prototype. Then we'll continue with the next 10. Those will be, I think I have again, we talked about the order that we placed earlier this year with BYD. We'll have 4 inductive chargers at each of 2 locations. One in the city of Lancaster. Again, that'll be Lancaster Choice Energy with support that would delivery from from Southern California Edison, the other 4 in the city of Palmdale at the Metrolink station in Palmdale, and then the remaining locations at the Metrolink station in Lancaster, out in the eastern part of our service area, and another one in South Palmdale. The ultimate ultimate depot charging will handle all 85 buses at a time. Again, we'll be using HAMS, the Health Alert Management System, which is an IO controls product on the buses for real-time reporting of state of charge and the health of the system, and then on site with ELMS. This is a Lancaster City Park, recently renamed in honor of the deputy sheriff that was shot in Lancaster recently. The arrow points to where they will have the inductive charging, the first of the inductive charging sites, and that'll be a 50 kilowatt. The other 3 locations that you see on the north side of the area there will be 250 kilowatt chargers. With the 250, we'll expect to get about 20 miles of range for every 10 minutes it's on top of the charger. That's when it's installed. You can see the circle there. That's the pad that's installed at the site. And as I said, we're starting out with 324 kilowatts in battery capacity. 10-minute charge will get us 20 miles. So we'll be able to get up to 385 miles of range with each of the buses. A little summary of our depot charging. We'll have 12,500 volts supplied by Southern California Edison, and that'll be redundant. We'll have actually 2 lines, one from the north and one from the south. We have a 15-acre site, so we're able to install the depot charging without really a whole lot of interruption in our service. The red and the black area is the initial installation. We're spreading that out so that we'll install all 4 transformers with the first phase. Down in the lower right-hand corner is where we'll have a generator. We'll be able to charge 25 buses at a time in case of a catastrophic power failure. We'll have automatic data collection on the buses, so reporting to Caltrans is going to be very easy for us. We'll be able to get that in real time. This is what the ELMS screen looks like. As you can see, we'll be able to have eventually all 85 buses on this. We can either manually move this around or program it so that it's time-based and can set some priorities based on the charge, the state of charge that the buses come back in on. Initially, we were looking at a peak of about 6,000 amps overnight. Now, with the en-route charging, we expect the buses to be able to come in with a fairly decent charge left on them. So the depot charging overnight will be fairly easy. The buses will also use IO controls head signs, so our utility workers, when they're on site overnight, will actually be able to see the state of the charge. It'll read out on the head sign so they can see which buses might have a problem. You will also get alerts, as you can see up on the screen, that one bus has an alert on it, so there's a problem with the charging system. And we always like visitors, so look forward to seeing any of you come see us. Any questions?
Hi, Len. Bill Sproul from San Diego. You talked about 4 transformers on your property. Is that scaled up for the full deployment, or is that the first 50?
Yeah, we've said it. We've organized the implementation, so we'll get all 4 transformers in this first phase.
So that's for all 80 buses.
Right. So with 3.9 million, we were expecting to eventually spend somewhere near 5 to 6 million. The last phase will just really only be wires. So we get a power transfer unit with each bus. In terms of the BYD equipment, the charger is actually integrated on the bus. So all we really have is a really expensive extension cord. Those things are about 8,000 a piece, and they come with the bus. So we'll as we grow, we'll have to install those power interfaces and then lay the wire, but that's going to really be a lot smaller part of what we're doing. We're averaging 1.8 kilowatts per mile.
Oh, go right ahead. And please use the microphone, though. We'll get you on that one.
One more question. What was my other question? Oh, on the warranty. What kind of warranty are you being provided with the new technology associated with the battery and the drivetrain?
Well, the motors have been around forever, so we have decent, typical industrial warranty on the motors. We're only getting a 12-year warranty on the batteries. Only.
So it's years, not miles then?
It's years.
Okay. So are you getting anything on the drivetrain?
As I recall, it's like 3 years on the drivetrain. There's no transmission, so it's direct drive on. It's a hub motor, so I believe it's 3 years.
And then do we know what the useful life is that it's certified for?
12 years.
It's certified for a useful life of 12 years?
The
and
bus.
We're only getting 3 years for a drivetrain?
The bus.
And so it's certified for a useful life of 12 years?
It's Altoona tested for 12 years.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, Nico, with the California Fuel Cell Partnership about your axle weight that was brought up earlier. Can you not hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, some people can, some people can. I can't. So you can hear me. The axle weight, can you maybe say a little bit more about that? Is that the same as your current buses, or is it also a challenge going forward? Because it was brought up earlier today. I know it's a challenge for most transit agencies to fit within that. Most of them work with an exemption, except for the Proterra buses. If I understand it correctly, they can fall under that. But how does that work for the BYD buses?
The two buses we have now are the first two that rolled out of the BYD factory in Lancaster, and they're heavier than the second generation because the density of the batteries is increased, so they've taken considerable weight off. Our current buses are about 900 pounds overweight, but that's certainly they've taken enough off so that they'll meet California requirements.
Thank you. And then my other question is related to the infrastructure. What lifetime are you assuming with your infrastructure? 20 years or more?
Lifetime of the infrastructure?
Yeah, I assume you write it off. So with the diesel or CNG infrastructure is also a number, and then you can write it off, and then you have to put a new infrastructure. Let's say eventually it will wear out. Do you have a number for that internally?
In terms of...
Because if you tell me 5 years, that means like in 5 years you would have to reinvest, which I don't expect is the case, but...
I'm not sure we've really looked at that at this point. If you understand that we started a demonstration project in 2014, that would be a one-year demonstration project, and in about 6 weeks our board decided that we were going to go all electric, but the demonstration had been a success. So the next CEO at AVTA will have to worry about how he or she replaces the infrastructure.
Ryan Shetterly, CCW. I'll help line out here. BYD offers a 5-year warranty on their traction motor. From the equipment manufacturer provider standpoint, we don't anticipate the traction motor itself ever really having any issues. It's a bulletproof technology. It's been around for a long time. The big concern is for transit agencies especially is going to be the battery pack. How long are they going to be able to maintain that range? So that's, you know, you can put your fears at rest there. The traction motors, you know, we anticipate those lasting longer than the buses themselves.
How did the drivers like them, and what's been the reaction to the inductive charging?
Our inductive charging will go operational later this month. Our local building inspectors have been reasonably paranoid. There's not been any problem with the charging in Monterey. There's not been any problem with the charging, and it's the same technology in McAllen, Texas. So, I mean, that's working. Our operators, the good ones are reacting very positively. Anecdotally, we have passengers that will wait a half an hour if they know a bus is on the route to take the electric bus rather than the old diesel buses that we have. So the public reaction's been very strong.
Lisa?
Thank you. This is Lisa from San Diego Airport Parking Company. I just wanted to bring in the difference, what does concern me as it relates to maybe not so much the municipalities, which have a lot more financial support associated with the purchase of their assets of transportation. You know, when it comes to a lot of the small and private fleet operators, you know, we are gathering those dollars ourselves, investing them, and trying to find a way to obviously reinvest constantly as the fleet ages. So, you know, what we do know what works is the branded companies like Cummins obviously has a good product. And when we go into some of these experiences that we've recently experienced with Smith Truck and Navistar, and even myself, I've had some bad experiences with my Zenith Motors, you know, they're not backing their product in the way from, and I'm just going to kind of go through a list of items. If the drivetrain isn't built for the same torque, that torque is crazy torque. It's not the same as it would be for the diesel vehicles when it comes to those engines in terms of motors and gearbox and the whole drivetrain. So I've experienced 7 broken drivetrains. So it's been a bad experience, but I'm not so concerned about the bad experience as much as being able to take these lessons learned and move forward and find a way to make sure that we're giving warranties to support the product while we're testing it, as well as OBD. The OBD dashboard in the EV vehicles, nobody can plug into it. Nobody but that one OEM. We've built a regulation associated with engines that anybody can plug into it. It's been an engine code for us to protect the emissions. And so we're exempting that certification process at the EPA level. And I have been out 3 vehicles for 3 months because nobody else can service me. And they basically just said, you know, sorry. And so that's a bad experience. And so my point is that we need to have some regulations associated with what we're used to in terms of warranties while we're testing the product. Because if the product works, it's a moot point. The OBD, I should be able to service my vehicle anywhere and not be held hostage to my OEM or dealer. And I'm not saying that everyone's going to be doing that, but there has been some bad experiences for operators that are private that can't associate themselves with continuing to purchase product when now you just learned, well, great, I'm testing your product and I think I have 36,000 miles on my drivetrain. I do that in 4 months. So the useful life to me is an asset that I can buy my Mercedes all day long. I can sell it with 300,000 miles on it for $10,000 like this. And so I think these are things that we can maybe look back and find a way to help these customers get the security and comfort that they need to take the risk and also stand beside the OEM and test the product. Because like I said, if it works, it's a moot point. And then we can eliminate some of these issues that I think are going to be popping up with the private operators more or less versus the municipalities. So I think the regulations that you were talking about, or the research and development, I think this is something that that we could at least find ways to look into the useful life, what we're going to do about durability.
Irby?
So also on the equipment side, we also recognize the importance of durability because at this point, the industry is so small that if you have one bad actor, it's not so-and-so is a bad actor, it's EVs don't work. And we have to acknowledge that that's actually the reaction that many of the early stage providers have come to the market with because the first generation of EV companies have gone out of business and there are stranded assets. That is a real legitimate risk. And there's a few things that can be done to ensure that that doesn't happen. There's on the individual businesses, there's a level of responsibility that everybody needs to be taking. On the fact that all of our pipelines for funding, it goes from early stage grant proof of concept straight into demonstration. There's no funding for any iteration or testing. So if you discover something that's a flaw in your technology and you want to improve upon it and you want to do, a full-scale demonstration again, you will never get funded for that. You will get funded for building 20 of the thing and scaling it up. You won't get funded for building 3 different versions, testing them against each other, and only building the reliable one. And so I think when we're planning for funding, we do need to plan for that reliability, and we need to make sure that it's being built on the customer's interest. And then thirdly, there is no good pathway right now in terms of certification. And we're in a very strange gray area, and Motive has been dealing with this on a sort of, we build a powertrain instead of an end-stage vehicle. And if you look at how things are managed on the fuel side, you get a Cummins engine, it's certified, it goes into everything. That's not the same with powertrains. And so there's no visibility into the quality of the powertrain that you're getting when you are purchasing. You're kind of blindly going on faith. And usually not very technical case studies that are out there. And so part of that I think needs to be done is if we, instead of certifying, this is a zero-emission vehicle, saying this is a zero-emission powertrain and it's been tested, and that way if it scales into 8 applications, there's a greater faith in the growth of the industry, as opposed to that delivery application works.
We have one more commenter?
I do like to kind of maybe restate a little bit about today's the purpose of today's meeting, because we do want to take advantage of a CPUC's proceeding and also the utilities deadline to submit their proposals. So we do appreciate, Lisa, your concern about other things. You have a very unique experience, and we would love to talk about those offline, but we would like to encourage people's discussion on how we want different proposals to be maybe brought up by utilities, because normally all the representatives from utilities are just so busy, and today we have such a rare opportunity to have everybody here. So I think we really like to direct our discussions on that towards that direction. Thanks.
So our next speaker would be Tony Cohen from Sunline. Are you on the phone? Tony? Should we go? Or is anybody else from Sunline on the line right now? Okay, so Garrison? Okay, so Garrison, are you on the line for Green Charge? No? Okay, I guess this part will be short. Well, I guess we'll move right ahead. Do we have a presentation from Tesla or just the speaking points? Okay, so Bo, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Certainly. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Bo Whiteman. I'm a senior manager on Tesla Motors EV infrastructure team down in Palo Alto. So I was invited here today to give a little bit of insight into the operation of a commercial high-powered DC charging network. Obviously, Tesla so far has been acting solely on the light-duty side of EVs. We're not quite dipping our toes into heavy-duty yet, but we do have a lot of experience with infrastructure, given that we operate the largest network of DC fast chargers in the world, in the country, and in the state of California. I think in California we operate somewhere right around 40 individual sites, each one of those having on average about 8 connectors that operate at 135 kilowatts. To give you a quick bit of history for those of you who don't know, we manufacture 2 vehicles down in Fremont, California, the Model S sedan and the Model X crossover SUV. Model S first went on sale back in mid-2012, and if you think back, there weren't a whole lot of other EVs on the market at the time. Pretty much your choices were the Mitsubishi Mi EV and the Nissan Leaf and the Chevy Volt. And then, you know, sneaking in on the side, you have Model S, which all of a sudden is capable of doing almost 3 times as many miles on a charge, capable of charging at much higher rates. And so at the time, there was a complete lack of infrastructure to support our vehicles. And we could not look our potential customers straight in the face and say, go ahead and throw out your BMW, buy this, it can do everything your BMW does. When in fact, without reliable infrastructure, that's not true. So just as Model S was preparing for its entry onto the US market, we surprised the world by deploying 8 supercharger stations, 2 on the East Coast, 6 in the state of California. That network has grown to over 320 supercharger locations throughout the United States today, and over 700 stations globally that are operational some 99.9% of the time. We strongly believe in the role and necessity of reliable, consistent, and available infrastructure to support our products. And I think that's something that on the heavy-duty side is just as important. If you can't complete a delivery or a trip, then you're stuck up a creek without a paddle. So we're also in a unique position because not only do we manufacture the vehicles, we manufacture the charging hardware, we install the charging hardware, we operate it, and we maintain it. So we are privy to a lot of information, kind of end to end, and can really dig into these utility questions that we've been talking about all day. We have a lot of experience with demand charges. Given the demand that our units pull at a station that has, so every 2 superchargers run off of 1 piece of hardware. So if we have a supercharger site with 10 stalls, 5 times 135, with a 25% decrease, is our peak demand. And that's usually puts a 10 stall site somewhere between 5 and 600 kilowatts. And we size these things so that if we build 10 stalls and 10 cars pull in at the exact same time and plug in at the exact same time, that we don't disrupt anything on the utility side, and that those customers experience the same interaction as they do at every other charging station they visit. So we, of course, understand the need for demand charges. There are a lot of ways that flexibility can be included, but we're not of the belief that it's reasonable to ask that they simply be eliminated. I will say that what makes demand charges a lot easier as the operator is volume. Demand charges can actually be great if your demand charges are what they are and then your cost per kilowatt hour is really, really reasonable. Suddenly, if you get a really busy site, that is a great place to be versus if you're in a position where you're per kilowatt hour costs are fixed. But then flip that. And this is why we continue to build infrastructure and operate infrastructure, is that to have a true nationwide network. And this is something that for some heavy-duty fleets is going to be really important. Those cross-country trucks, having that sort of infrastructure is going to be critical versus the last mile trucks or the box trucks, which require a different form of infrastructure. But when you are building a nationwide network and need to facilitate a long distance route, some sites may be used a lot and some sites may be used a little. And given that our primary business is not in fact charging, our first business is cars and stationary storage, we're able to take heavier losses on sites that don't see as much use. So you look at the state of Wyoming, I think we have 4 supercharger stations there. You can drive all the way across the state, it's fantastic. But like 50 people a month use each one of them, compared to somewhere like Mountain View, California that sees 5,000 plus people a month. So somewhere in there, there's room for creativity, and I think it would be interesting to explore rates that kind of depending on the usage, maybe for a certain period of time, it is a set per kilowatt hour price, peak and off peak. And then as you hit certain thresholds, demand fees come back and, the prices are what they are. But I'm optimistic that there's a way for us all to kind of be in a better place on this without just trying to get rid of them altogether. I guess the last point that I want to make, someone had brought up the term route simulation, which I like. When we build superchargers, we don't just kind of throw them out there. It's a lot more complicated than that. We track, ownership density areas. We track usage across the existing network. We take feedback from our customers, and then most importantly, we model based on energy usage of our products. So we have built a software tool where we can plug in 2 points and adjust for speed, wind. The computer takes into consideration elevation changes, and then it spits out the number of kilowatt hours needed to perform that route in each one of our products. So rather than spacing our fast charging stations on a particular distance, we space them based on energy demand by our products. So our smallest battery pack that we offer right now is a 60 kilowatt hour battery. We try to keep our charging stations no more than about 40 kilowatt hours apart. And that way you also get a little bit of a buffer in there. So you're not, running on fumes, so to speak. We haven't really fixed that word yet in the industry. We haven't thought of a better one. But in that way, you have a little bit of flexibility. And then if we do offer products with longer battery ranges, so our largest battery pack is now 100 kilowatt hours. And depending on your path of travel, you can actually kind of leapfrog particular locations and stop where it makes the most sense for you. So, we want to be a resource to anyone in this room who has questions about high-powered DC charging. We can't share everything, but we're happy to share everything that we can. So if anyone has any questions, happy to take them.
Hi, this is Ray Pingle from Sierra Club. So I know when the supercharger network was originally announced, there was some discussion of putting storage at every location. I know you do have storage at some, but it seems to me that that would be a no-brainer to reduce the demand charges to put storage at every location.
Right. So when we first launched Supercharger back in 2012, we had 2 things kind of pairing along with it, and those were solar and stationary storage. The solar aspect turned out simply not to be cost effective. Building a solar canopy over 8 parking stalls does not have a very reasonable payback. Stationary, however, does and is becoming more and more feasible over time. We have somewhere around a dozen of our sites in California outfitted with stationary storage, and we use that technology to clip our peaks. Because this is an interesting predicament, because on the light duty side, there's no schedule. customers come and go as they please, and the power has to be there every time they pull up, no questions asked. Anything otherwise is unacceptable to us. And this kind of goes back to the core of why we do this, to provide a consistent user experience. And stationary storage has helped us at certain locations take a big bite out of those demand fees. And at the same time, really, it's great for the grid. But historically, the cost of stationary has been high, and the demand charges have to be outrageous for it to make economic sense. But since we have it at about a dozen locations, there are places where it does. And I think from Tesla, you will see over the coming years, especially as the economies of scale start kicking in with the new factory in Nevada, that we'll be deploying more and more stationary storage across our portfolio of sites.
I have a question here. Bill, thanks a lot for giving us this overview here. So we heard a lot of issues from different heavy-duty applications today. We have transit agencies, we have trucking industry. Even within the trucking industry, we look at owner-operators, or we look at one big trucking company, or we might be able to look at an industrial business park, or other areas like ports or other distribution centers. From a third-party charging infrastructure provider, maybe like Tesla in the future for heavy duty, which application do you guys see might be the easiest for you to step in?
That's a loaded question. The interesting thing about DC charging, and really that's for the most part what we're talking about. There's always going to be room for AC charging. Talk about those box trucks, they're not making deliveries at midnight, so plug those things in overnight and they're great for the next day. But especially when you get into the big guns, when you get into the tractor trailers, having access to DC charging along the major corridors is going to be really important to the success of those fleets. The hard thing about electric vehicle infrastructure is that you have to throw out everything that you've been used to your entire life engaging in the practice of driving. If you look at a traditional gas station, there's the gas station, and then there's usually a convenience store. They don't make a lot of money selling you gas. They make money on you walking inside and buying a soda, a pack of cigarettes, a lottery ticket. With EV charging and really it's a 5-minute or less stay. EV charging stations, the best that we're capable of doing right now is about a 20-minute stay for a 50% charge. And so on the light duty side, we've been teaming up with retail centers, with hotels, with restaurants, places that have amenities where consumers can go and spend some money and spend some time and be happy. And the thing is that it's really difficult to make money selling electricity, secondhand through EVSE. Especially in the United States, electricity is pretty cheap across the board, and consumers aren't willing to pay a huge premium for it. Sorry, I just got to thinking, and it's part of the reason why last week we've announced that into the future, supercharging is not always going to be free like the way that it has been. And part of the reason that we've given away supercharger for free is, one, it was just easier initially, kind of making the pitch to all these people out there that they'd want this on their property at a time when, go back to 2012 and sell somebody an electric car. It wasn't an easy thing to do. And even as we impose a fee on supercharging next year, we have made it very clear that we have no intention of ever profiting on it. We simply want to start being able to pay off some of the costs as we have more and more people in urban areas using that equipment. And so when you look at the heavy duty side, it's a completely different scenario altogether. Because where trucks stop at those types of service plazas, they're in prime locations. They're right off the interstate. Public vehicles already have their depots picked out where they go to on a regular basis, and it's going to be a matter of adding infrastructure there. And in terms of ownership, that is going to be a little bit of a tricky outcome. I mean, taking off my Tesla hat, it's going to be hard for a third party to completely come along and offer you a fantastic deal that you honestly could do the same just, by yourself. If you own a fleet of trucks that travel long distances, it's in your interest to invest in that infrastructure. If you're a city, and you're operating this fleet, it's in your interest to invest in that infrastructure. And I would look at it almost as wrapping it up into the cost of the vehicle itself.
So with that, we know that some of the fleets also mentioned earlier that, for example, like a transit fleet, their main business is to make sure that the buses go out on time, so that their customers don't have to wait in rain, in sun, for hours. But they also understand that if they have to handle all the infrastructure themselves, it's going to be some major personnel upgrade as well in terms of training, in terms of experience. So some transit agencies also told us that it could be a game changer for them if somebody can come in to take care of the infrastructure, if someone can come in to take care of all the chargers. So what's in for a third-party charging company to step in to kind of provide this kind of service?
And I think you hit on something really important because, with the transition from whatever technology you're currently using, let's take a fleet of buses. If they're diesel buses, CNG buses, propane buses, inevitably they're going to require some form of maintenance. Maintaining electric vehicle infrastructure is, any trained and certified electrician is capable of doing it. There is obviously some specialization that goes into it and some added training, but it's something that existing staff can probably handle at the municipal level. You may have to add one more person, but you may also be relieving people elsewhere. If you're going from diesel to electric vehicles, the maintenance falls through the floor on those things. There's just not a whole lot of moving parts on EVs. I'm not saying that there's no room for a third party, but it's historically, at least, and this is kind of experience on the light duty side, there really are only 3 light duty EV charging providers in the US, and that's us, ChargePoint, and EVgo. And you can look up all of their business models, but at the end of the day, we've been able to expand and grow and maintain our operation really well, and it's in large part because it's not our main business. It is, however, a part of our business to ensure owner happiness, and this falls into that category. But we've lost money on Supercharger every day that we've operated it, but we have simultaneously sold a lot more cars because of it, and that definitely pays dividends. And obviously, we're in this business, and our CEO has talked about it at great length, because global warming is a threat to this country, to this state, and the more internal combustion vehicles that we can displace through this technology, the better. So infrastructure is key to all of this, though. Without it, you're not going to have that kind of uptake. And we talk about the chicken and the egg all the time. And that's why we've jumped into this degree. And it's not just us. Nissan has done great work funding projects through ChargePoint, BMW through EVgo. And so these other OEMs are just as involved as we are, though they may not have their logo on it the same way that we do.
Nico, you have a question, comment?
Nico with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. Thank you both for the overview. A question, and this is all on your perspective, because you're not engaged, as you said, in heavy-duty applications. What is your perspective on So I have two questions really. The first is your perspective on a credit concept framework with regards to how that could apply to trucks to make things happen. And the second one is really related to, say, what benefit would a focus on a specific vehicle class have for an introduction or making a case for a specific vehicle technology?
Okay. On the first one, I think our perspective on credits for EV infrastructure installation, we would be gung-ho on that, especially if it, obviously any sort of public funding has to be paired with kind of smart parameters. But what we like about credits is that it requires a counterparty to be actively participating. And if you have a party who, can demonstrate a need and a use for this infrastructure, and that need and that use meet the criteria of this credit, rebate, whatever you want to call it, that's great. And that is a way smarter outlay of funds than just throwing it out at grants and hoping something sticks to the wall. By kind of requiring that a handshake take place between two parties, you're guaranteeing that that infrastructure has a purpose and that it won't just be a stranded asset. Stranded assets, especially in this industry, are, brought up all the time because unfortunately over the years we've had a lot of players come and go. It's by having somebody, around who has not only a plan to install this, but to operate it and maintain it, and having, such criteria set in order to obtain that credit or rebate is a really smart way of doing it. And in terms of focusing on vehicle class, the hardest thing about, in working in this segment of the light duty industry is that there's this constant conversation of, well, what if we built all of this infrastructure? Wouldn't people just suddenly buy all these cars? But the problem isn't that, well, to some degree infrastructure is still a problem, but it is becoming less and less a problem every day. The other challenge is simply diversity of products. Compared to internal combustion powered vehicles, there are far fewer EVs available, and well, that go substantial distances. There are over 30 EVs on the road today, but 10 of those are plug-in hybrids that go 20 to 50 miles before the engine kicks on, and the rest, save for Teslas, all go just around 100 miles on a charge. So when it comes to kind of focusing on a specific vehicle class, I think it obviously depends on the fleet operator. Both BYD and Proterra and others have done some pretty cool work on buses that are being taken up by municipalities across the country. I know UPS and FedEx have done some box truck pilots, and we've kept no secret in our interest of getting into the heavy duty tractor trailer game as well. So there's room for everything, and the more the merrier. That's always on the light duty side. That's been our opinion, and I think on the heavy duty side, that's our opinion as well. Whatever, just bring them all in, and as they get taken up, if other folks see Antelope Valley installing all of these EV buses, and they say, oh, it's going great for them, and we're replacing 10 buses this year, we should look at doing those. It's contagious. It's quite funny if you go to certain communities, you'll see 10 Teslas across a couple of blocks, and all that happened was one household bought one, and then the neighbor saw it and they wanted one, and then it just kind of spreads. So
thank you.
I'd like to go ahead and check in if our Tony Cohen, are you on the line now? I heard some people chime in. Or Garrison. Okay. then I'd like to propose that we move to the final group discussion here. Port of Los Angeles is going to give us an overview. Carter, are you on the line?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll get the presentation on the screen.
Okay.
Then we'll have you start. So if you want to do an introduction, that would be great.
Sure, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Carter Atkins. I'm a environmental specialist with the Port of Los Angeles, specifically in the air quality group. We've been focusing on emission reductions of criteria pollutants from our 5 major source categories at the port, which are the ocean-going vessels, heavy-duty trucks, cargo handling equipment, rail, and hovercraft. And we've been recently focusing on, still focusing on this criteria pollutant reductions, but also at greenhouse gas reductions. So the Harbor Department has released a zero emissions white paper, which has identified a pathway to demonstrate zero emission and near zero emission technologies, specifically on terminals, because it's kind of a fixed landscape, and you can put infrastructure on the terminal and demonstrate these types of equipment. So if you want to go back to the first page, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay. Yeah, if you can go to the first page of the presentation.
Should be on your screen.
Okay. I have the second. But anyway, I'll just start off. Recently, the Los Angeles Harbor Department received a grant amount of $14,510,400 under the California Air Resources Board FY 2014-2015 grant solicitation, air quality program, and low carbon transportation greenhouse gas reduction fund investments under multi-source facility demonstration project. With that, the Harbor Department has partnered with Pasha Stevedoring Terminal, a Port of Los Angeles terminal located in the disadvantaged community of Wilmington. And the vision for this terminal is to incorporate zero and near zero emission cargo handling equipment to move goods from ships through the terminal to clean transportation to their final destinations, while making portions of their terminal operations more resilient through solar power generation and battery storage. It's been the vision of this terminal operator to be a beacon of light in case the grid goes down due to natural causes or some sort of foreign threat, that it could provide aid to the local area should something unfortunately like that happen. All right, next slide, please.
Might be a lag. Yeah, are we on slide number 2 now?
Yeah, please. Yeah, slide number 2.
So there may be a lag. That's what we have on the screen now.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, there's probably a lag. So Pasha Stevedoring and Terminals. It's a break bulk terminal. It moves products that cannot be placed into containers. So primarily, they move steel slabs, steel coil. They have a dedicated service to take steel from the terminal out by rail to a facility in Fontana. What you're seeing there in the middle of the screen is the terminal layout. As you can see, it's not like a container terminal. It's very, very open and flat to house these kind of different sizes of cargo. As mentioned, it's a California, U.S.-owned company founded in 1947 and moves about 600 million in cargo annually. And again, the terminal has really been committed to sustainability and resiliency, as I mentioned previously, to provide aid to the local community should the grid go down. Next slide, please. So the Green Omni terminal will serve as a first step in transitioning Pasha terminal to a zero-emission terminal while serving as a scalable model that can be replicated at other ports and industrial facilities throughout California, the country, and the world. So we see that we can, if successfully demonstrated here at a marine terminal where you have very harsh conditions due to the marine environment as well as the duty cycles and loads and the weight of this cargo that these electric vehicles will be pulling around, we envision that this can be transferable to other industrial facilities. So you have there on the screen rail yards, warehouses, and distribution centers. So in fact, the Port of LA has along with a CARB grant, helped fund a Transfer zero-emission yard tractor that's been operating pretty successfully out at an IKEA distribution warehouse. So next slide, slide 4. The types of equipment we'll be demonstrating are 4 electric yard tractors. 2 of them are BYD and 2 are TransPower. We'll be converting 2 high-tonnage forklifts to battery electric, converting one top handler to electric. We'll be getting 2 electric on-road drayage trucks. All that, with the exception of BYD, will be provided by TransPower. And then, as part of a greenhouse gas emission capture system, we'll be demonstrating a land-based ship emission capture control system that will capture criteria pollution and demonstrate carbon destruction on the terminal. What you're seeing there in the photo is the barge-based version that captures diesel particulate and destroys NOx, and that's been a CARB-approved technology to serve as equivalency to the shore power, which is now a California regulation requiring container ships to plug into shore at berth so they can turn off their auxiliary engines. We're going to demonstrate, the goal is to have standardized charging. We're going to be, putting these TransPower and BYD chargers in on this phase of the project. The ports is working on a standardization. We have a standardization committee trying to develop a standard for heavy-duty charging infrastructure. Lastly, we'll be demonstrating 1 megawatt of solar. It won't look like that in the picture, but it's going to be rooftop solar connected to a 2.6 megawatt hour battery storage. The solar will be provided by Permacity. The battery storage will be provided by BYD, and the goal there is it'll be all connected to a microgrid controller. So should the grid go out, then this system can provide for a limited period of time electricity to run critical infrastructure at the terminal. All right, next slide. This is just showing the project team. We've assembled a very large group, that has vast experience in terminal operations, sustainability, efficiency, resiliency, infrastructure, design, and planning. So the California Air Resources Board serves as the project manager, the project lead, grant administrator. Then we have the Port of LA. Burns and McDonnell is they serve 2 roles as a project manager as well as engineering design for the microgrid. We have technical advisors from LADWP, South Coast AQMD, UCLA, and UC Riverside CCERT. And below you can see all the technology provider players. You have Mike Simon from TransPower, Andy Swan from BYD, Nick Ponsich, CAE Trimer. That is the ship emission capture system. UCR CCERT and Permacity. All right, next slide, please. What you're seeing is an aerial of the terminal. You have the 1 megawatt of solar on the rooftop that's outlined in blue, cross-hatching. Then you see a electrical conduit. What we're envisioning is using some existing conduit to run the electrical cables to the substation. That other warehouse has been demolished. It was damaged in a fire, so all that is open. The substation, we have to add on additional infrastructure to tie in this microgrid controller, and you see the general locations of the charging system and battery storage. And then the ShoreCat emission treatment system is a standalone system, and it's powered by a diesel generator, so it is mobile. It can mobilize, move out to the wharf when the ship is at berth, run the system, and then it can move back off the wharf when not in use. Those emissions from that system are actually run back through the treatment system. So getting at the heart of this kind of the project, the next slide. There's actually, if you click through it, there's some animation that happens, but once you go to this the system, in the event that there's a power outage, you could not get power to run the terminal. So, and even with, but when you add the battery storage, you can charge the battery from the grid at night, and then top it off with solar during the day. Yeah, there you go. That just finally popped up on the screen. So if you click it once, there'll be a bunch of red. Yeah, there you go. The red. No trespassing or whatever. Anyway, it just shows, the power goes out, and then you are out of commission there. And then, but when you add backup generation or battery storage, you can supply power to that transformer and supply power to the terminal. And then secondarily, when you add the solar, then you can reduce power demands, peak shaving, base load type activities. So all of this will be, demonstrated, and really this is just a first step in resiliency. The terminal does have plans to add on additional resources to incorporate additional power generation running in an islanded mode. Their total power demand is about 1 megawatt. That's probably enough to run the administration building. We're not sure if it'll run the crane, but we'll just have to see. But when you do, add additional power resources, then the crane could possibly operate it as well. So the benefits of this project, if you go to the next slide, we're anticipating reducing 300 tons of CO2 annually. We envision this as a test facility for these zero and near zero emission technologies. This is also a great platform terminal because it's not a container terminal where you do still have demanding duty cycles, but they're just not as a container terminal as I think probably the heavier duty, the most rigorous duty cycle of all the marine terminals out there. So this will be you don't have a 24/7 operation either. This is kind of, you run a shift, maybe two, we'll be able to demonstrate some opportunity charging, and really just test to see how the equipment works, test to see how this microgrid works, because this microgrid will be the first system in place at a marine terminal. So there's a lot of eyes watching this project. And again, we hope this will serve as a catalyst of change for sustainable and resilient goods movement. So if you go to the last slide, some of the issues, lessons learned so far. One is the solar feed-in tariff. The terminal operator is using the FIT program to incorporation of the LIDWP. All that power from the 1 megawatt of solar will be sold to the grid for a price. And so we are currently working with LIDWP on how to integrate the solar into the microgrid when the power is out. And we anticipate that will happen almost never, but it's just something that we have to iron out with DWP so we can be able to utilize that power when the power is out, or when the grid's out, or the terminal operates in an islanded mode. Charging automation and standardization. As I briefly mentioned before, the ports are on a working group to standardize cargo handling equipment charging. The issue comes down to labor. If you have widespread deployment of these battery electric cargo handling equipment, you run into union jurisdictions. So to give you an example, you'd have the driver of the equipment. They would break for lunch or what have you, walk off and go on the break, and then you would have to have a engineer or electrical engineer type person actually do the connection and disconnection of the equipment. So, which translate into higher labor costs. So we're looking into a solution where the driver parks the vehicle in a designated stall or parking lot, and then there you have an automated arm, if you will, with an eye that looks for the plug socket, and then it goes out and connects to this vehicle. So this project, it's probably, we will not be able to demonstrate this standardization or whatever that standardization will eventually look like. This round of funding will not pay for that, but however, it could be something to talk about in a future grant project. Integrating aging infrastructure into these projects, specifically speaking to the electrical infrastructure. We have very old switchgear transformers out there, and so we are need to come up with ways where you can connect this newer equipment to these older switchgear, so the system is still stable and can operate. I believe this switchgear is, it's very old switchgear. I don't have the exact date. Hazmat's another issue when looking at these projects, and specifically on the there's two areas of hazmat. One is prepping the roof for solar. We've had asbestos issues, so we've had to treat all the roof for asbestos and do all the necessary cleanup because they had to re-roof that building to prep it for that solar. And then another potential hazmat area is the conduit. We believe there's existing conduit that can house the solar, the electrical wires. But if that's not the case, either A, we'd have to trench, and this is a brownfield site, so remediating all that trench material, the excavated material, could be very expensive, or coming up with maybe less expensive hazmat issues, but then you're hanging the cables underneath the wharf, so then you have marine protection, or you have to protect it from the elements, which can be expensive as well. And then finally, permitting. I think this just is par for the course on any kind of project you deal with the port. You have a coastal development permit. When you're doing anything on a terminal, it requires a harbor engineer's permit. This particular project, they're going to be moving one of the wharf cranes, so that's an additional permit unique to this project. CEQA review is required, and that was actually done as part of the grant application. And then electrical and structural assessment from LA City Building and Safety is also required as part of this approvals before we can get anything really anything going. On the infrastructure side, on the equipment side, we have Pacia has all the contracts in place to procure all this equipment, and we anticipate the BYD tractors will start arriving, I think, late December, and then we'll have a majority of the Transpower equipment delivered by the end of February-ish. So with that, are there any questions?
So does anybody have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I do, Carter. Could you elaborate a little, or talk a little bit about your work with the utility and how you've pursued that, when the timeline started, and what it looks like moving forward?
Yeah, we've had a few meetings with the utility as they were part of the project or the grant application as an advisor, so they were aware of the project way back when we submitted the application, which was September of 2015. And we've been having ongoing discussions with them on how to tie in that solar. And currently, what we're doing is they're fully committed on making this project a success, and we're submitting them one-line diagrams of kind of options of how to tie in the solar into this microgrid controller, because it's never been done before, especially LADWP. So we're going to be coming up with a solution with them, hopefully relatively quickly. So it's I guess the lessons learned on that is when you're doing infrastructure projects is get your utility involved very early on, because you're going to be doing things maybe that are outside a specified program or standard, if there's no guidelines or requirements already established for that. And that's the same with the LA Building and Safety, where we're ahead of them on the development of these types of projects. So this will kind of be the first one-off, within the city of Los Angeles.
If there aren't any specific questions, I guess we'll have one more opportunity. So is Sunline or Green Charge on the phone? Okay. So if not, so does anybody have any other general comments, questions, concerns? I know that one of the basic questions that somebody brought up before was ultimately what motivates fleets to actually take the plunge into zero emissions and to try new technology, because it is an early technology phase especially for the heavy duty space. Any of the fleet owners want to kind of comment on that or kind of answer that? That was a question from the utilities.
I have no doubt if the cost per mile is an incentive, that's kind of how we're incentivized right now with our volume of fuel. The more we buy, the better that price is. And so we're highly incentivized as it relates to that. So I think that if we could get to that cost per mile with our utilities in any way, shape, or form, when it comes to a kilowatt hour, however it's coupled with demand or not, or or if it's really, if we can actually, I like CalStart's suggestion, us getting to a cost-based rate. I think that would be a way for us to all move forward in a way that looks at this differently, but I think also addressing their issue related to cost and volume is something that you can't ignore. That provides businesses with amounts of profit that that I vision that this could be a new opportunity for the utility companies.
And so on that end, and I'll look to Chris and Lisa both for this, one of the comments I think that you pointed out, but also has been an experience of the transits, it's when transit fleets were buying 1 or 2 buses to operate them during the day in fast charge. I think as Ryan pointed out, the demand charges are much higher because you're not using a whole lot of energy, and so that's a bigger part of your bill. And so one of the things that was put in place, they're called waivers, or essentially alternative rate structure that is essentially an existing rate structure that doesn't have demand charges for a period of up to 3 years. I think there were 2 cases of those. That in essence allowed the fleet to have more predictable electricity costs. It provided a few years for them to become familiar with the technology and make sure that they wanted to ultimately make the investment. And then I think at least most fleets are in fact expanding their fleet, and now that they're going to have more buses per charger, the amount of energy, their demand charge will be about the same as what it would have been on the one bus. But now that they're using energy for multiple buses on the same charger, and so that cost gets spread out, and so their average cost per kilowatt hour ends up being lower. And so I think, Bo, you pointed out the concept of saying, well, rather than having a rate that in essence up to a certain amount of usage or demand be effectively low on demand charges until usage gets up to a higher point where in essence you would have more vehicles at the facility or the property. That could be a mechanism to do that might work. So just in that vein of that concept of building up to scaling up your fleet doesn't always happen in the first year or 2. Building in some period of time where you might benefit from a little bit lower cost, but ultimately pay it back over time as your fleet expands or just go to standard rates. Is that a discussion topic, or anybody want to make comments on whether the utility should consider that or not consider it, and what the pros and cons to that might be?
Yeah, just take a more 30,000 foot overview that with the current internal combustion paradigm, the more the fleet uses the fuel, the cheaper it gets. Bulk fuel agreements are cheaper than if you're just going to a retail station. And so to the extent that the new electric vehicles are going to be in competition with the internal combustion engine technologies, and that private fleets differ a little bit from transit and from light duty owners in that we're in competition with each other as well. And so anything that can be done to make sure that the more you use, it doesn't get more expensive, that the price is predictable, and that from a state policy perspective, you're rewarding early adopters rather than saying, do it, and also, by the way, it's going to get more expensive for you the more you do what we ask. I think it's just smoothing out some of those frictions that exist with the existing policies on electricity that were meant to encourage efficiency. We're actually asking people to use more, and so I would say it's just more 30,000 foot level. Whatever you can do to make sure that it's not punitive to move to EVs is going to be beneficial.
So I actually got a chance to speak with Jana, and I've also spoke, during the break, but I've also spoken with Southern California Edison. And one of the things that they all talk about is that it's wildly expensive, and they really can't recover the costs on like a onesies and twosies basis. But when the fleets, it just goes to your principle of when the fleet starts talking about, oh, we're going to do 25, we're going to do 30, we're going to do 40 buses. And now that's a load profile that allows them to recover the cost. And then to take it the next step further, when a transit agency does something the way Juan has done at Antelope Valley and that Foothills Transit has done, when they say, we are going to 100% transition to battery electric by a date certain, then that allows the utility to plan out the load and the infrastructure with a date certain so that they'll know. And as the, as the manufacturer, knowing the duty cycle of the buses, of all the buses, we can build a load profile based on what it would take to charge those. And now you have a complete solution that would allow the utilities, and most of them are looking at doing this, to put in rate cases where they recover the costs of the infrastructure, which takes a huge weight off of the shoulders, as you've probably heard in some of the other meetings where transit agency says, well, I can't even afford to get charging to my facility. Well, if you're taking that off the table for them, and all they've got to do is worry about choosing the type of service equipment or installing it themselves in some instances, depending on different utilities want to do it different ways, but at least up to the point of the service equipment, if that disappears as a cost for transit agencies, that makes a huge chunk of the barrier to implementation disappear as well. And so I think it's, it's almost like somebody was saying, there's a cart before the horse type of situation where, when it's happening in onesies and twosies, everybody's nervous, but most agencies are going to go that way because they want to test out the technology. They want to prove it. I think Bill left, but I saw him laughing when he was talking about, when somebody else was talking about, you're not going to just jump in and Bill Sproul, he's from San Diego. Nobody's going to jump in and buy, a ton of buses right out of the box. They want to validate it themselves, was the terminology somebody used. And that's exactly what we've seen, but we're starting to see bigger agencies go with a bigger number to start with because of the work that early adopters like Antelope Valley and Foothill have done. So I would say that I think there's a real opportunity as we move forward to have the utilities own this piece of the transit electrification, shall we say, when we get utilities, transit agencies saying, hey, we are going to transition to battery electric or whatever, or fuel cell, whatever the transition may be, whatever the technology choice, we're going to transition to zero emission. Utilities can plan for it, then they can rate base it and cover it under whatever their proposal is to the PUC. And it varies by the three different, the big three investor-owned utilities.
So I wanted to talk more about that because as you mentioned, the total cost of electrification is a lot higher when you're deploying a small number of vehicles. I mean, everything from the capital cost of the vehicle to the infrastructure, the cost per mile rises because you get the demand charges, but you're not actually utilizing all the energy. There has been some talk about the establishment of transitionary rates. So rates that exist for the small volume of vehicles while you move into larger volumes. Lisa, San Diego Gas and Electric, that was part of why they were talking to you, was to talk about exploring the idea of a transitionary rate, because that benefits the smaller fleets more than the larger ones. So I think it's going to be, of course, all of our utilities are gone except for SMUD, but thank you for being here. I think that utilities need to be looking at that as well. All of these issues with transportation electrification tend to be a whole slew of smaller issues rather than 2 or 3 really big ones. And so I think we need to be looking at all of the solutions for all the steps of the deployment of the vehicles and as the fleets expand.
So David, do you have a comment?
Yes, David Rentschler, City of Fairfield. And while I do agree with the economies of scale, I think what's being overlooked is the small operator who might have 5 buses. Their budgets are extremely small. For them to get 5 buses would be a miracle, and much less the charging infrastructure. So it's a lot harder for them to compete for money than it is large agencies to get 5 buses. A large agency that has 800 buses, 5 buses is nothing to them versus a small agency. I'm a small agency, or I represent a small agency, and we have 48 fixed route buses. For us to get 5 electric buses is going to be a big deal. So I think that it would be a lot harder for a small agency that, you know, is under 100 buses to take advantage of those economies of scale, because they don't have the funding sources or resources that the larger agencies have.
So perhaps those, what would be a transitionary program for larger agencies would be a permanent program for smaller ones.
Can I add something to that, Ryan, with CalSTAR? That's a really good point, and I think we've heard about segmenting fleet needs in terms of duty cycles. We think about technical operations and charging infrastructure, but I think we also need to think about segmenting by the willingness and ability to own and manage EVSE. And so I think one factor is size. There's also the nature of how they use federal funding. There's their overall balance sheet, their business strategy. So I think we have some room to do. I don't know if it's CalSTAR or others to do that, but just digging into what Dave was describing a little more.
Yeah, and maybe an easy first start is simply asking transit agencies, do they prefer to own the infrastructure, or do they want someone to take care of it for them? And Len, I meant to ask you that during your session. Can you speak a little to like what your considerations were in that?
Our considerations were that at the point where we needed to start doing that, we didn't have a relationship with a utility that would step forward, so we started doing that on our own. At this point, Southern California Edison will own everything up to the transformers on our facility. So it is at this point a shared kind of operation. We will have everything after the transformers, which basically the wire and the what we call a power interface. So the extension cord that plugs into the bus. So there is some relationship there.
I just want to bring up just a question that was asked of Port of LA. The question is simply, who is developing the microgrid controller for the project? Did we? Carter, are you still there? I can't answer the question. I don't know if anybody else knows the answer to that one. So sorry, we didn't ask him earlier.
We can forward that question to Carter.
Yeah, let's pass it on. Do any other comments, questions, or any other topics that we didn't actually touch on today?
One more. This is Lisa from San Diego Airport Parking Company. The other thing that we could do with the utilities is trying to work together as it relates to specifically the speed, because in the heavy duty and medium duty, it's vastly different in terms of the technology that's required to use it the way that we do use it, which is with a higher speed of charging batteries. And so it's not 1 in 3 kilowatts. I've got 14, and that's real minimal. You know, you've got, some of these utilities got 250, and how many did you say you had, Lynn? 250. You know, and how many of those do you have?
Len Engel, we'll have 11 250 kilowatt chargers on site. We'll have 100 and 200 basically between the 40 footers and the 60s and 45s. 60s and 45s will use 200 kW chargers, basically 160, and the 40s will use 100 kilowatt.
Yeah, so those are some speeds that are unheard of in terms of ever, I think, in a lot of ways with commercial use and equipment. So, you know, the more that we can work with the utility companies to bring in what we need is going to be that critical element too, because getting to the price is one element associated with our cost per mile, but then also bringing in specifically the volts that we need to support the technology is another, I think, another opportunity for us to work with the utility company, and maybe that's where they do just take this element over. I mean, or somebody to take it over.
Are you indicating that you're somewhat limited on the total power draw in your particular location?
I am. Yeah, I am. But so is my technology at the moment because it's first generation. But that's where we're moving into this next generation of technology. To keep the vehicles on the road, we have to do what we learned from 3 years in the reprieve with San Joaquin and Foothill Transit. What they learned is that they needed to have speed to propel the vehicles for that short range. And that speed had to be exactly what Len's doing in order to keep the vehicles on the road. So my 14 kilowatts are really hard for me to keep the vehicles on the road for the distance that we need to travel because, the vehicle range is no longer 300 miles, it's only 100 miles. And so, you're having to do this behavior of charging. And so when the speed is too slow, you can't take care of the customers. And so that's where we're coming up with this barrier. So if we had speed available by the utilities, we're already there with the technology. It's coming along, but I think that might be something that we can continue to explore. Or like I said, just maybe they take over this issue as it relates to infrastructure.
I think if you follow the trends in the light duty industry, if you get into that, there's a whole new initiative right now to take even light duty much faster rate of charging. And the discussion now and what there's actually working groups is going to 350 kW charging. And there's actually discussion of how do you create a modern day gas station where you have 8 of those in one location. So just like a modern day gas station where you've got 8, and when that happens at the utility level, the whole power distribution paradigm is going to be much different. So yeah, that's why a lot of people are getting together monthly to discuss how that's going to happen. But I think it kind of gets to your issue. If that becomes a lot more available at any level, it makes it more benefit to tap off to that existing stuff for your own application. But that's a little bit looking out to the future, so we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Just wanted to say that I, one, agree that that is an area that the utilities could own. And two, I think one of the areas that the state can own is you have rules that all the utilities must follow, and all the utilities know what those are. Nobody in transportation by default knows that about their providers. They have to go out and have these one-to-one relationships to figure out what plans do you have, what rules are you operating on, what's the best way for this to work with my operations. And some fleets are really great at that, and some people have the resources to do it effectively, and others don't. And so if one thing the state could do would be make sure that that information is public and develop an API so that any charging solution can access that data. So if you already know that there's going to be demand charges, say that all utilities must send out a signal about demand charges in this format so that all chargers can react to it. So that way, right now, you can have chargers being built that will work with this future standard so that you don't have stranded assets, but also so that you can get the utilities to begin to think of themselves as an integrated grid, because we can't think about a smart grid and then have every technology provider say, here's my PG&E solution, here's my SMUD solution, here's my Southern California Edison solution. That's never going to be a scalable model. So if you want a scalable model, the state needs to come in and tell the utilities that's necessary.
And that's part of what we're working on, and that's part of the idea behind SB 350, encouraging coordination. And that's also tying into what we've talked about in the past with utilities having a dedicated outward-facing component of their company that just works with fleets. That they're specialists in transportation electrification, that they can help and distribute information effectively. They can do outreach and education to encourage otherwise uninterested fleets to electrify. So I think that's the first start in then developing the framework for that sort of setup. But as we've talked about as well, there's a lot of information that needs to be collected in order to have a solid enough information base for standardized communication.
Oh, good. No, and I think some of the issues that you're referring to, I suspect will be covered by the PUC's
Well, I would hope
meeting.
so.
Yeah.
the one thing about the kind of solution under SB 350 with having an outward-facing element of every utility is that's great if you are only in one service territory and you're going to work with the same people. But for example, our biggest customer, Ameripride, is based in Minneapolis, and they have a location in Vernon, which would be talking to LA Department of Water and Power. But meanwhile, their Fresno location is talking to PG&E, which is not the same as their Van Nuys location. So once again, you've got a fleet manager who's out in Minneapolis suddenly going, well, talk to your local utility. Well, my local utility is in every single one of the 23 locations we serve. That doesn't look like a scalable solution, even if from the utility standpoint, it's more than what they've been doing. So as long as we're trying to say what's our framework for the future, I think we need to push beyond just the near-term solutions.
Yeah, and so that's a really good point. One of the things that I've been stressing in communication with the utilities and PUC is that there needs to be constant communication to make sure that programs are interchangeable, or at least similar enough that a company operating across different utilities, because it happens all the time. I mean, transit agencies frequently are crossing utility lines, and when they go to electrify, they're going to be working with multiple utilities. So it would be a lot easier and would help the deployment for things to be similar enough that there aren't a whole bunch of extra steps in dealing with one utility versus another, where they have to change their operation in one utility area, right? And so I think it'd be really valuable. I don't know if you've been following the PUC's proceedings for transportation electrification, but it might be valuable to follow that and submit comment. There's going to be a workshop that is yet unscheduled at which utilities will present their SB 350 plans, and that might be a really good venue to make a comment that maybe as part of those applications, utilities should be proposing how they go about their coordination with each other and how they go about outreach and education in a coordinated manner.
So, David.
David, City of Fairfield. I would just ask that the state really pay close attention to their wording with heavy duty and off-road. As the example given of the port up here where they had off-road forklifts and so forth is much different than off-road construction equipment that is going from site to site. As a city, we have that equipment. For example, front-end loaders are just now starting to get into hybrids, just coming on the market. There aren't even hybrids in road graders or some of the other equipment out there. So they're decades behind light duty and even medium and some of the fancy things that are coming out with the Nikola truck and so forth. So manufacturers like John Deere and some of the other companies are just now dipping their toe into hybrids. So please keep aware of that. And when you're wording off-road, those fall into off-road, as well as some of the other equipment that is just decades away from ever being even close to being a hybrid, much less an electric.
No, we do recognize that, and again, are looking even in the off-road arena in terms of where does electrification make the most sense. I mean, it does apply in different applications, as you've mentioned. I mean, some man lifts and airport equipment and other things. A number of those are already electric. And again, and then TRUs is part of the discussion. Plugging in is pretty straightforward, but even remotely, battery storage or other things can potentially extend their use away from a power source as well. So I think that's an area, and we do recognize that clearly the off-road heavy equipment, is much further behind in terms of timing, technology, and frankly, access to power is going to vary quite a bit too. So there's a lot more to be addressed there. I think that's why we kind of are starting with the heavy-duty on-road vehicles more so. I mean, some of the off-road ones that are centrally located are kind of where we see the low-hanging fruit, opportunities for better learning, for centralized fleets, maintenance practices, and other things like that. So, go ahead.
Just one more quick. Some of the heavy-duty equipment, such as a sewer truck, it not only has a chassis engine, but has an auxiliary engine to run a big blower that, vacuums up dirt and water and things when they have sewer main breaks and so forth. So you're talking about extreme amounts of horsepower and torque needed for long periods of time. And so, again, that's a heavy-duty vehicle. It really should be in a different classification than a tractor-trailer that's going to go 400 miles and stop and take a break and get to recharge, and versus a crew that's out for 23 hours straight trying to fix a major water main break. So please keep that in mind too.
Okay.
Thank you.
We will. Well, so, okay, one more.
Sounds like we're wrapping up. I want to make one final thought, partly to underline what I said, something I said earlier, but after hearing more about this discussion today, I really want to emphasize. It's just that for those of us that have spent a lot of time around the ARB and the CEC proceedings, it's important to understand that the cadence of the CPUC decisions that will roll out are different. We've got one swing we're taking between now and January 20th on this application for the 3 IOUs, and then I forgot what the timing is, but I think it's going to be a few years before they do another one. And I'm not sure to what extent ARB has been involved with the development of previous applications that relate to this, but I guess I would just encourage as much discussion between now and then, in particular between ARB and CPUC, on making sure that the roadmap that the regulations and I guess just the ambitions that ARB has are really well understood and developed in CPUC's minds, the staff's minds, as the Jan 20 deadline hits. Because when it does, and as we've heard today, there are a lot of different interpretations about the priority of ratepayer advocacy versus accelerated transportation and electrification. I think a lot of the people in this room are big proponents of the transportation electrification, but the kind of status quo is that with the proceedings on CPUC side, we're going to see, I think, a very strong kind of a reflex for ratepayer advocacy, which is legitimate. But just we've got big ambitions, a lot of us here in this room.
No, understood. Okay, so I guess I can't really wrap up the meeting because there was a lot of different discussion topics. So I guess, but I think broadly we heard a lot of different topics, different viewpoints. We did hear from some of the utilities, some of the things they're looking at, where infrastructure is clearly one of those. As we already kind of covered, there is time for them to get additional information, and they're working out some details as to what the process might look like. So I'd encourage those of you who are interested to potentially, again, contact your utility about any particular projects you're looking at and particular viewpoint in terms of how you might deploy a fleet on your own or your interest, so they can factor it in. That was kind of part of the goal of today's meeting. I think I try to continue to meet with utilities until the extent that we learn of more questions or issues, and even some of the modeling that ARB would be doing, what the time horizon is, because I'm not expecting that we're going to be able to model everything the utilities need to know before January, because that was more of a long-term project. But to the extent that we can provide more insight into that earlier, and even answering the question as to what the scope of that discussion should be, and the viewpoint in terms of what is the scope of how you interpret the costs is a very important issue, because if the utilities look at it strictly as utility ratepayer costs that do not include any externalities of any kind, then that's going to be a very narrow proposal. And if they do incorporate other aspects of the benefits, then it might not be as narrow and ultimately further the market. So with that, I thank all of you for sticking it through here to the end and participating in the process. And to the extent that we can facilitate anything, we'd be glad to do so. So thank you all for coming.